Picture this: a rusted-out garage on the wrong side of a dying steel town, rain hammering the tin roof like gunfire, and a little girl, 8 years old, shoes held together with duct tape, walks through a door no grown man in this county would dare open. She's shaking, not from the cold, from something worse. She crosses 30 feet of oil-stained concrete past 6 bikers who've done things the law pretends never happened, and she places 3 pennies on a workbench in front of the most dangerous man in Blackwater Ridge. "Please," she says, "it's all I have. Can you protect us?" What happened next silenced every man in that room. And Christ, you need to hear this story to the end. Stay with me. If this one hits you the way it hit me, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. The last furnace in Blackwater Ridge shut down on a Tuesday in October, and nobody threw a party. Nobody said a word. The smokestacks that had painted the sky orange for 40 years just stopped breathing, and the town exhaled with them. Slow, quiet, like a man who'd been holding on to something he knew was already gone. By November, half the storefronts on Main Street had plywood where glass used to be. The diner kept its lights on, but the coffee tasted like it had given up too. And the rain never stopped. It came sideways off the river, cold and relentless, turning the streets into something between a memory and a bruise. Boone Ryder didn't notice the weather anymore. He noticed engines, the way a carburetor coughed when the fuel line had a crack, the way a timing chain whispered before it snapped. He'd been listening to machines talk for 23 years, and they were the only conversation he trusted. His garage sat at the end of Ridgeline Road, a cinder-block rectangle with a hand-painted sign that read, "Ryder Mechanical," in letters that were peeling at the edges. 2 service bays, a parts room that smelled like old gasoline and copper, a back office with a desk he never sat at and a photograph he never looked at, face down in the top drawer, buried under invoices, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon. He was 46 years old, 6'2", hands scarred from wrenches and worse. His leather cut hung on a nail by the door, faded, patched, the colors of the Iron Drifter's MC still visible if you knew where to look. He'd worn it for 15 years, rode hard, enforced harder. Did things that kept him awake on nights when the bourbon ran out. Then his daughter died, and the cut went on the nail, and Boone went into the garage, and he hadn't come back out. That was 4 years ago. He didn't talk about it. The men who rode with him knew better than to ask. On this particular evening, a Thursday, the kind of Thursday that felt like it had been going on for a week, Boone was underneath a 1987 Sportster with a transmission problem when the side door opened. He heard it before he saw it. The hinges had a specific groan, a low metallic complaint that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years and never had. Then footsteps. Small ones. Too light to be a customer, too hesitant to be someone who belonged. He slid out from under the bike on the creeper, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black. And he saw her. She was standing just inside the door, backlit by the sodium light from the parking lot. 8 years old, maybe. Thin in a way that wasn't natural. The kind of thin that came from meals being optional. Brown hair pulled into a ponytail that was coming apart. A jacket 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up past her wrists, and shoes that had been repaired with tape more than once. She was soaking wet. Her eyes were enormous. Not with wonder, not with curiosity, with calculation. She was measuring the room, measuring him, measuring the distance between where she stood and the door behind her in case she needed to run. Boone had seen that look before, on men in combat zones, on women in shelters. Never on a kid this young. "Garage is closed," he said. Not mean, not gentle, just a fact. She didn't move. Across the shop, Hatchet, a barrel-chested rider with a beard that reached his sternum and a prosthetic left hand he'd earned in Fallujah, looked up from the engine he was rebuilding. His eyes found the girl, then found Boone, and he said nothing. 2 other men, Coyote and Briggs, stopped their card game at the folding table near the back wall. The garage had its own silence, the kind that settled over a room when something was about to change and everyone could feel it. The girl walked forward, not fast, not slow, deliberate, each step placed with a kind of terrified precision, like she was crossing a frozen lake and listening for cracks. She walked past the tool racks, past the hydraulic lift, past Hatchet, who watched her with an expression that cracked somewhere behind his eyes. She walked all the way to Boone's workbench, a steel surface cluttered with wrenches and gaskets and an ashtray that hadn't been emptied in a week. And she placed her hand on the edge of it. Then she opened her other hand. 3 pennies. Tarnished, old. One of them had been flattened on a railroad track at some point, the face of Lincoln stretched into something unrecognizable. She set them on the steel surface one at a time, each one clicking against the metal like a heartbeat. "Please," she said. Her voice was barely there. A thread. "It's all I have. Can you protect us?" Nobody breathed. Boone stared at the pennies. He stared at them for a long time. Long enough for the rain to change rhythm on the roof. Long enough for Coyote to put down his cards and look away, jaw tight. Long enough for something in the back of Boone's chest, something he'd cemented shut 4 years ago, to shift. He picked up the pennies, one at a time, slowly. He held them in his palm, looked at them like they weighed more than 3 cents, and then he slipped them into the inside pocket of his jacket, the one closest to his chest. "Kid," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You just hired the most stubborn bodyguard in town." The girl didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, a sound so small and so broken that Hatchet turned away and pressed his good hand against his face. Her name was Ivy Holloway, and by the time Boone learned everything she was carrying, he would understand that those 3 pennies were the most expensive payment anyone had ever made in his presence. The story came out in pieces, not because Ivy didn't want to tell it, but because she'd learned, the way abused children learn, through repetition and punishment, that telling the truth was dangerous. So she rationed it. Small doses, testing each sentence against Boone's face to see if he'd flinch or laugh. Or tell her she was lying. He didn't do any of those things. He pulled a stool over to the workbench, sat down so he was closer to her height, and listened. Hatchet brought a blanket from the back office. Briggs made hot chocolate from a packet he'd been saving for no particular reason. Coyote stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching the parking lot, because old habits died hard and someone always watched the door. Ivy's mother was Claire Holloway, 31, a nurse's aide at the county clinic before she married Wade Granger 3 years ago. Wade was a commercial real estate developer, or that's what his business card said. In Blackwater Ridge, he was the man who'd bought the old paper mill, the man who sat on the town council, the man who donated to the volunteer fire department and sponsored the Little League team and shook hands at every ribbon-cutting ceremony with a smile that photographers loved. He was polished, articulate, the kind of man that newspaper editors quoted when they needed a voice of civic optimism. Behind the front door of the house on Ridgeview Terrace, a 4-bedroom colonial that Wade had renovated with obsessive precision, that man didn't exist. Ivy didn't use the word abuse. She didn't have to. She described mornings when her mother couldn't get out of bed because her ribs hurt. Nights when Wade's voice carried through the walls like something with teeth. The way he controlled the money. The way he controlled the phone. The way he controlled who came to the house, and when, and for how long. She described the smile, the one he wore in public, the one that vanished the moment the door closed, replaced by something flat and cold and calculating. "He doesn't hit me," Ivy said, and the way she said it made clear that what he did instead was worse. The insults, the isolation, the systematic dismantling of an 8-year-old's belief that she mattered. He told her she was stupid. He told her she was the reason her mother was unhappy. He told her that if she ever said anything to anyone, a teacher, a neighbor, anyone, he would make sure Claire disappeared, not divorce, not custody, disappeared. Ivy believed him. She had no reason not to. "What about school?" Boone asked. His voice was level, but Hatchet, who'd known him for 19 years, could see the tendon in his jaw pulsing like a second heartbeat. "The counselor asked once," Ivy said, "about a bruise on my arm. I said I fell off my bike." She paused. "I don't have a bike." And nobody followed up. Wade called the school the next day. He donated new computers to the library. She looked down at the workbench. They didn't ask again. Boone absorbed this. He absorbed it the way a wall absorbs a fist, silently, completely, with damage that wouldn't show until later. He thought about the systems that were supposed to catch this: the school counselor, the county social services office, the neighbors who must have heard something through the walls of that colonial on Ridgeview Terrace. He thought about all the eyes that had looked at Wade Granger's smile and decided it was easier to believe it than to look behind it. He thought about his daughter, about the promise he'd made to protect her, about the way that promise had turned to ash in a hospital room at 3 in the morning while machines beeped and then stopped beeping. "Where's your mom right now?" he asked. "Home. He's at a meeting until 9. Ivy looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:14. "I have to be back before he gets home. If he finds out I left..." "How'd you get here?" "Walked. From Ridgeview?" "Yes. That was 3.5 miles. In the rain. In the dark. At 8 years old." Boone looked at her shoes, the tape peeling, the soles worn through, and something behind his sternum cracked like a frozen pipe in January. "Why me?" he said. "Why here?" Ivy met his eyes. There was no childhood left in that look, just arithmetic. "Because everyone in town is scared of you," she said, "and Wade isn't scared of anyone else." The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of the garage. It settled into the oil stains on the floor and the grease on Boone's knuckles and the space between one breath and the next. Hatchet spoke first, quiet, almost to himself. "Well, she ain't wrong." Boone drove Ivy home. Not on the bike, in the truck, a dented F-150 with rust along the wheel wells and a heater that worked when it felt like it. He parked 2 blocks from Ridgeview Terrace, killed the headlights, and watched her walk the rest of the way. She moved through the rain without hurrying because hurrying attracted attention, and attention was something she'd been trained to avoid. The porch light at the Granger house was on, warm yellow, welcoming. The kind of light that real estate agents photograph for listings. Ivy slipped through the side gate without looking back. The light stayed on. The street stayed quiet. And Boone sat in the truck with the engine running, staring at that house, and for the first time in 4 years he felt something besides the cold mechanical rhythm of survival. He felt fury. And underneath the fury, deeper, harder to name, more dangerous because he'd forgotten what it felt like. He felt purpose. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the back office of the garage with the bourbon bottle on the desk and the photograph still face down in the drawer, and he made phone calls. 3 of them. The first was to Hatchet, who was already awake because Hatchet was always awake. The second was to a woman named Delilah Cross, a paralegal in Ashford who owed the Iron Drifters a favor she'd never been asked to repay. The third was to a number he hadn't dialed in 2 years, a number that belonged to a man who didn't go by his real name anymore. A man who could find financial records the way a bloodhound finds a body. By morning, Boone had the beginning of a plan. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't legal in every particular. But it was a plan, and it started with a simple question. Who is Wade Granger when nobody's watching? The answer came faster than Boone expected, and it was uglier than even he'd prepared for. Delilah pulled the public records first. Wade Granger had been married once before Claire. His first wife, Sandra, had filed for divorce in a county 200 miles east. The filing mentioned irreconcilable differences, no abuse allegations, no restraining order, clean and quiet. But Delilah, who had spent 12 years navigating the gap between what court documents said and what actually happened, made some calls. Sandra Granger, now Sandra Beckett, was living in a trailer park outside Milford under a name she'd legally changed. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to be found. And when Delilah carefully, gently mentioned Wade's name, the line went silent for 11 seconds before Sandra said, "Is someone else in trouble?" "Yes," Delilah said. "Then you need to move fast, because by the time you see what he's doing, he's already 3 steps ahead." Boone processed this in the garage, standing over a Harley Softail he'd been restoring for a customer who kept delaying pickup. Hatchet leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his prosthetic hand catching the fluorescent light. "His first wife ran," Boone said. "And she's still running," Hatchet said. "Which means he doesn't stop. Which means we don't either." They didn't shake on it. They didn't need to. Hatchet had ridden beside Boone through things that made a handshake unnecessary. through nights when the only language was action and the only contract was showing up. He'd lost his hand and kept writing. He'd buried friends and kept writing. When Boone's daughter died and the world collapsed into a single point of grief so dense it bent light around it, Hatchet had been the one who sat in the garage and said nothing for 6 hours straight, because saying nothing was sometimes the only honest thing a man could do. Now he straightened up, cracked his neck, and said, "I'll talk to Coyote and Briggs. We need eyes on that house." "Quiet," Boone said. "No profiles, no cuts. We're mechanics who happen to live nearby." "Understood." They started watching, in shifts, from parked cars on adjacent streets, from the diner across from Wade's office downtown, from the bleachers at the elementary school where Ivy attended 3rd grade with a teacher who gave gold stars for reading, but never noticed the way the girl flinched when a man raised his voice in the hallway. What they saw confirmed everything Ivy had said, and added layers she'd been too young to articulate. Wade controlled Claire's movements with surgical precision. He drove her to work and picked her up. He monitored her phone. Coyote, who had a background in telecommunications that he didn't discuss in polite company, confirmed that Wade had installed tracking software on Claire's device. He managed the household finances through a single account that required his authorization for any withdrawal over $20. Claire couldn't buy groceries without his permission, couldn't fill her own car with gas, couldn't buy her daughter a new pair of shoes without submitting to a process that looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was: captivity dressed up as marriage. And through all of it, Wade smiled. At the bank, at the grocery store, at the school pickup line where he waved to other parents and complimented their children and projected the image of a devoted family man with the precision of a man who understood that image was the only thing standing between him and consequences. Boone watched it all. He cataloged it. He felt the fury build behind his ribs like pressure in a boiler room with no release valve, and he held it, because releasing it now would accomplish nothing except giving Wade exactly what he needed. Proof that Boone Ryder was the dangerous criminal the town already half believed him to be. On the 7th day of surveillance, Ivy came back to the garage. It was after school, 3:47 in the afternoon. She walked through the side door the same way she had the first time, quiet, deliberate, measuring. But this time she wasn't soaking wet. This time she carried a backpack with a broken zipper and a composition notebook with a purple cover. She sat on the stool by the workbench without being invited because somehow in the space of 1 week, that stool had become hers. "He knows," she said. Boone set down the wrench he was holding. "Knows what?" "That someone's watching. He came home last night and checked all the windows. Then he checked Mom's phone. Then he sat in the living room with the lights off for an hour." "Did he say anything?" "He said we were going to move, after Thanksgiving, to a place where nobody knows us." She opened the composition notebook. Inside, in handwriting that was careful and small and heartbreakingly neat, she had written dates and times, observations, things Wade had said, things he had done. She'd been keeping a record. An 8-year-old girl living inside a cage built by a man who controlled every aspect of her existence had been building a case file in a purple notebook with a cover that had a cartoon cat on it. Boone looked at the notebook. He looked at the dates. He looked at the entry from 2 Tuesdays ago that read, "Wade told Mom if she called her sister again, he would make sure she regretted it. Mom cried in the bathroom for 40 minutes. I counted." He closed the notebook gently. He placed it on the workbench beside a socket set and a can of WD-40. And he looked at Ivy with an expression that Hatchet, watching from across the shop, would later describe as the moment Boone Ryder came back from the dead. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," Boone said, "and I've met some brave people." "I'm not brave," Ivy said. "I'm just tired of being scared." "That's the same thing, kid." She didn't argue. She picked at a thread on her backpack strap. "He wants to move us before anyone can help. He did it before, with his first wife. She told me." Boone went still. "Sandra talked to you?" "No, I found letters in the attic from before Mom married him. Letters Sandra sent to a friend, warning her, warning anyone who would listen." Ivy pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack, a photocopy, smudged and creased. "She wrote that by the time you realize what he is, he's already erased everything that proves it." The room contracted. Boone read the letter. Not the whole thing, just enough to understand that Sandra Granger had tried, years ago, to leave a trail of evidence behind, and Wade had found it and destroyed it, and Sandra had run because running was the only option left. Except now there was another option. Standing in a garage that smelled like motor oil and stale coffee, holding a purple notebook full of a child's meticulous testimony. Boone looked at Hatchet. Hatchet looked back. The communication between them was wordless and instantaneous, the product of years spent in situations where hesitation was a luxury neither could afford. "Thanksgiving," Boone said. "That's the deadline." 3 weeks, Hatchet said. "Then we work fast." He turned back to Ivy. "I need you to do something hard." "Harder than walking 3 miles in the rain to ask a stranger for help?" Despite everything, despite the weight of what was happening, despite the fury and the grief and the ticking clock, Boone almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched, and then it was gone. "I need you to keep being invisible," he said. "At home, at school, don't change anything. Don't let him see that you've been here. Don't let him see the notebook. Can you do that?" "I've been invisible my whole life," Ivy said. "It's the only thing I'm good at." "That's not true, but right now I need you to use it." She nodded. She picked up her backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Didn't turn around. "Mr. Ryder?" "Yeah. Those pennies, they were my dad's. My real dad. Before he died. They were in his pocket when they found him." A pause. The rain started again outside, tapping against the metal roof like fingers on a table. "They're the only thing I have left of him." She walked out into the gray afternoon. The door groaned shut behind her. Boone stood at the workbench for a long time. He reached into his jacket pocket and felt the 3 pennies, cold, worn, carrying the weight of a dead man's memory and a living girl's trust. He thought about the photograph in the desk drawer, about his daughter's face, about the space between what he'd lost and what had just walked into his garage and demanded, with 3 cents and a voice like broken glass, that he become something more than a man who fixed engines and drank alone. Hatchet appeared beside him, didn't say anything, just stood there. "Get everyone," Boone said finally. His voice was low, stripped of everything except the bedrock. "Every rider who still answers when we call. Every contact who owes us. Every favor we've never collected. And if Wade moves first?" Boone pulled the pennies from his pocket, held them in his open palm, 3 small circles of copper that caught the overhead light, and held it. "Then we move faster." What neither of them knew, what Boone wouldn't discover until 48 hours later when Delilah called at 2 a.m. with her voice shaking for the first time in the 12 years he'd known her, was that Wade Granger wasn't just a controlling husband with a talent for public performance. He was something far worse, and he already knew Boone's name. Delilah's voice on the phone at 2 a.m. carried the texture of someone who had just read something that rearranged her understanding of the world. "Boone, wake up!" He wasn't asleep. He was sitting in the back office with the lights off and a cup of cold coffee balanced on his knee, staring at the wall where the shadows from passing headlights stretched and collapsed like breathing. He'd been doing this for 3 hours. Thinking. Running scenarios. Calculating how many days he had before Thanksgiving and how many moves Wade Granger could make in each one. "I'm here," he said. Wade Granger's real name isn't Wade Granger. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "Say that again?" "His birth name is Darren Wade Lusk, born in Harlan County, Kentucky. Changed his name legally 12 years ago in a courthouse in Virginia. Quiet filing, no press, no flags." Before the name change, Darren Lusk had 2 domestic violence complaints filed against him in 2 different counties. Both dropped. Both complainants relocated within 60 days of withdrawing their statements. Delilah paused. The sound of papers shifting came through the line. "There's more. Tell me." Sandra wasn't his first wife. She was his second. The first one, a woman named Jolene Mackey, filed for divorce in 2009. 6 weeks later, she died in a single-car accident on a mountain road outside Pikeville. Ruled accidental. No investigation. No toxicology. The local coroner signed off in 48 hours. Boone set the coffee down. His hand was steady, but something behind his eyes had changed. A recalibration, the kind that happened when a target shifted from problem to threat. You're telling me there's a dead woman in his past. I'm telling you there's a dead woman, a name change, a pattern of control, and a man who has spent 12 years building a public identity specifically designed to make sure nobody ever connects the dots. Delilah's voice dropped. Boone, this isn't a jealous husband. This is a predator with a system, and he's had 12 years to perfect it. The line hummed between them. Outside, the wind pushed rain against the garage windows in uneven bursts, like someone testing a door to see if it was locked. How deep did you go? Boone asked. Deep enough that if he's monitoring searches connected to his old name, he'll know someone's looking. Is he? I don't know, but a man who changes his name and moves 3 states away isn't the kind of man who leaves loose ends. Boone hung up. He sat in the dark for another 20 minutes. Then he opened the desk drawer, moved the invoices and the bourbon bottle, and looked at the photograph for the first time in 2 years. A girl, brown hair, missing her front teeth, laughing at something outside the frame. His daughter, Lily, 7 years old in the picture. 7 years old forever. He put the photograph back, closed the drawer, and called Hatchet. By 6 a.m., the garage was full. Not the casual gathering of men who happened to be around. This was a table. The real kind. The kind that hadn't been called since Boone stepped away from the club. Hatchet sat to his right, prosthetic hand resting flat on the workbench. Coyote leaned against the lift post, rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. Briggs, wide-shouldered, quiet, the kind of man who spoke once a day and made it count, occupied the stool Ivy had claimed as her own. And 2 others had come in overnight. Mercer, a long-haul trucker with a face like eroded sandstone who ran logistics for the Iron Drifters' northern chapters, and Preach, a former combat medic whose nickname had nothing to do with sermons and everything to do with the way he delivered bad news. Calm, measured, absolute. 6 men in a garage at dawn, coffee steaming from mismatched mugs, the overhead fluorescents buzzing at a frequency that lived just below conscious awareness. No one had spoken yet. They were waiting for Boone, because Boone was the one who called the table, and the one who called the table spoke first. He told them everything. Darren Lusk, Jolene Mackey, the name change, the pattern, Sandra running and still running, Claire trapped, and the clock ticking toward Thanksgiving and a relocation that would bury her so deep no one would find her. When he finished, the silence had a different quality, heavier, compressed. The silence of men who understood what they were being asked to step into. Mercer spoke first. You're talking about going after a man who might have killed his first wife and got away clean. I'm talking about making sure he doesn't do it again. There's a difference between fixing bikes and fixing this, Boone. This is law enforcement territory. This is prosecutors and warrants, and law enforcement had 12 years, Boone said. 2 counties, 2 states, multiple complaints, and here we are. He's right, Hatchet said, but he said it to the room, not to Boone, which meant he was managing the conversation, not agreeing with it. But Mercer's got a point too. We go hard at this guy without airtight evidence. We don't save anyone. We give him ammunition. Man like this, clean public image, council seat, money. First thing he does is make us the story. Not him. Us. The bikers who harassed a respected businessman, Coyote said flatly. I can write the headline myself. So we don't give him the headline, Boone said. And how exactly do we do that? The voice came from the back of the room. Preach. He hadn't moved from his position against the far wall, arms folded, watching the conversation the way a surgeon watches a monitor. Detached, analytical, looking for the number that didn't fit. Because from where I'm standing, brother, you're not thinking about this with your head. You're thinking about it with that drawer you keep locked in your desk. The room went cold. Not temperature cold. The other kind. The kind that happened when someone said the thing everyone was thinking and no one was willing to say. Boone's jaw tightened. A vein in his temple surfaced, pulsed, retreated. Careful. I don't need to be careful. I need to be honest. Preach pushed off the wall and took 3 steps forward, close enough that the overhead light carved his features into sharp planes. 4 years ago you shut down. You stopped writing. You stopped answering calls. You sat in this garage and turned yourself into a ghost because losing Lily broke something in you that none of us knew how to fix. And now a little girl walks in here with 3 pennies, and suddenly you're calling a table? Suddenly you're Boone Ryder again. You got a problem with that? I've got a problem with a man who's running toward a fire because it feels better than sitting in the cold. That's not protection, Boone. That's substitution. And if you're substituting Ivy for Lily in your head, then every decision you make from here on out is compromised. The words landed like fists, clean, direct, precisely targeted. Preach had always had that ability, the capacity to locate the exact nerve and press it with clinical accuracy. It was what made him invaluable in a crisis and unbearable in a conversation. Boone stood up. His chair scraped against the concrete floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a blade across leather. He walked toward Preach, stopped 2 feet away, close enough to feel the other man's breath. You think I don't know that? Boone's voice was low, stripped. The voice of a man standing on the edge of something and fully aware of the drop. You think I haven't spent every night this week staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I'm doing this for Ivy, or for Lily, or for some version of myself that died in that hospital room? I know what this is, Preach. I know what it costs. And I'm telling you, standing right here, looking you in the eye, that it doesn't matter. Because that kid walked 3 miles in the rain to ask for help, and the system that's supposed to give it to her has been asleep for 12 years. So yeah, maybe I'm broken. Maybe I'm compromised. Maybe every man at this table should walk out that door and let the county handle it the way the county always handles it, which is to say, not at all. He paused. But those pennies are in my pocket, and I don't give them back. The garage hummed. The fluorescents buzzed. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway, the engine dropping through gears with a groan that vibrated through the cinderblock walls. Preach held Boone's stare for a long time. Then he nodded. Not agreement, acknowledgement. The nod of a man who had said what needed to be said and received the only answer that mattered. Then we do this right, Preach said, by the book. Legal evidence, documentation, chain of custody that a prosecutor can use without a defense attorney shredding it on day 1. No shortcuts, no club justice. Because if we cut corners, we don't just lose while we hand him Claire and Ivy on a plate. Agreed, Boone said. I need to hear everyone say it. Hatchet. Agreed. Coyote. Agreed. Briggs, who had been silent the entire meeting, shifted on the stool and said one word. Agreed. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, but someone needs to talk to Claire. Without her cooperation, everything else is noise. He was right. And that was the problem none of them had solved. Claire Holloway existed behind a wall that Wade had built over 3 years of systematic isolation. She had no friends in Blackwater Ridge. Wade had made sure of that. Her family was out of state, and contact had been reduced to monitored phone calls on holidays. She went to work. She came home. She existed inside the architecture of Wade's control with the muted efficiency of someone who had stopped believing that any other way of living was possible. Boone couldn't approach her directly. A former biker enforcer showing up at the home of a respected businessman's wife would trigger exactly the narrative Wade needed. He couldn't approach her at work. Wade monitored her schedule, and any deviation would be noticed and punished. He couldn't send one of the others because Claire had no reason to trust any of them and every reason to be afraid. So he sent the only person who could walk through Wade's defenses without setting off alarms. He sent nobody. He waited. And Ivy came to him. She appeared at the garage on Saturday morning, different from the previous visits, faster, more urgent, her composition notebook clutched against her chest like body armor. She climbed onto her stool and opened the notebook to a page near the back. He hit her, she said. The words dropped into the garage like stones into still water. Hatchet, who was changing brake pads on a Dyna, stopped moving. His prosthetic hand gripped the caliper with a force that should have bent the metal. When? Boone asked. Last night, after dinner. She burned the chicken and he... Ivy stopped. She looked at the notebook, at the page where she'd written the date, the time, the sequence of events in her careful, small handwriting. He grabbed her arm and pushed her into the counter. Then he hit her, on the side of her face, below the ear where her hair covers it. She said it like a field report. Clinical, detached. An 8-year-old girl describing domestic violence with the emotional distance of a war correspondent, because detachment was the only armor she had. "Where were you?" Boone asked, and he asked it gently, which was harder for him than anything else he'd done that week. "In my room. I heard it through the floor." She paused. "The floors are hardwood. Sound carries." "Ivy, did he touch you?" "No." Quick. Automatic. Then slower. "He doesn't touch me. He just talks. He tells me things about myself until I believe them." Boone reached across the workbench and placed his hand, scarred, calloused, still carrying traces of engine grease in the creases, on top of hers. She didn't pull away. She didn't lean in. She just let it be there, the way a person lets a wall be there when they've been standing alone for too long. "I need you to do something for me," Boone said. "I know. You need me to talk to Mom." "Can you?" "She won't listen. She thinks if she stays quiet, it'll stop. It never stops. But she thinks it will. She doesn't have to listen. She just has to know that there's somewhere to go, that if she walks out that door, there are people on the other side of it." Ivy considered this. She had the face of a child and the calculations of someone much older, and watching those two things occupy the same space was the kind of thing that made Hatchet excuse himself to the parking lot and stand in the cold for 10 minutes, breathing. "Okay," she said, "but you need to know something first." "What?" "Wade has a safe in the basement, combination lock. He goes down there every Sunday night after we're asleep. I can hear the dial from my room." She tapped the notebook. "I wrote down the sounds, the clicks, 22, 14, 31, every Sunday, same combination." Boone stared at her. "You memorized the combination by listening through the floor?" "Hardwood," she said again. "Sound carries." Coyote, who had been pouring coffee across the room and pretending not to listen, turned around and said, "This kid's gonna run the world someday." Nobody laughed. But nobody disagreed. The safe changed everything. Whatever Wade kept in that basement, documents, recordings, evidence of his real identity, records of his financial manipulations, represented the kind of material that could dismantle his facade in a way that no amount of external investigation could match. But accessing it meant entering Wade's house, without permission, without a warrant, without any legal authority whatsoever, which meant anything they found would be inadmissible, unless they found another way. The argument that followed was the worst the group had experienced since the night Boone announced he was stepping away from the club. It happened in the garage after Ivy left, and it split the room in half. Mercer wanted to go in. "We photograph everything in that safe. We know what we're dealing with. Maybe there's enough to get a real warrant. Maybe there's enough to get the state police involved. But we can't fight what we can't see." Preach shut it down. "Break into a councilman's house? Former club members? With a record? Every piece of evidence we collect after that becomes fruit of the poison tree. A first-year law student could get it thrown out, and Wade's lawyer won't be a first-year law student. So we just wait? While he's hitting her? We build a parallel case, financial records, public documents, witness statements from Sandra, medical records if Claire will consent. We build it clean, and we build it so tight that when it lands on a prosecutor's desk, there's no room for Wade to maneuver. That takes months. Then it takes months. She doesn't have months." Mercer slammed his palm on the workbench. The sound cracked through the garage like a gunshot. "He's moving them after Thanksgiving. That's 3 weeks. Less. And you want to play lawyer while a woman and a child." "I want to win," Preach said, and his voice didn't rise. It dropped, lower, quieter, more dangerous in its control. "Losing feels righteous for about 5 minutes. Then the case gets dismissed, Wade relocates with Claire and Ivy, and we never see them again. Is that what you want? Because that's what happens when we skip steps." Mercer looked at Boone. "You're the one who called the table. What do you say?" Boone stood at the workbench, 3 pennies in his pocket, a photograph face down in a drawer, a clock ticking toward a deadline he couldn't extend. He looked at Preach, who was right. He looked at Mercer, who was also right. He looked at the impossible space between legal precision and human urgency, and he saw Ivy's face in it. The face of a girl who had walked through rain and darkness to ask for help from men the world had already decided were the wrong kind of men, Both, he said. We build the legal case, and we find a way to get someone into that house who has a right to be there. Who? Hatchett asked. Boone didn't answer immediately. He turned to Briggs, who had been silent, as Briggs usually was, through the entire argument. Briggs was the only one at the table who didn't look like a biker. Clean-shaven, wire-rimmed glasses. A degree in social work he'd earned after his second deployment and before his third. He'd worked for County Child Protective Services for 2 years before burning out and ending up in the orbit of men who solved problems without filing paperwork. Briggs, Boone said, you still have your credentials? Expired. But you know the system, the procedures, the language. I know how it's supposed to work, which is different from how it does work. I need you to make it work. File a report, formal, anonymous tip to CPS, child in danger at Ridgeview Terrace. The county sends an investigator. The investigator gets inside the house, gets eyes on Claire, on Ivy, on the living conditions. If Wade's smart, and he is, he'll have the house looking perfect. But an investigator with the right training knows what to look for. The things you can't clean up in time. The flinch when a hand moves too fast. The way a kid sits on the edge of a chair instead of the middle. The bruise below the ear where the hair covers it. Briggs took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. An anonymous tip triggers a mandatory investigation within 72 hours in this state. Wade can't refuse entry without a court order, and refusing entry flags the case. If the investigator is good, and I know two who are, they'll see through the staging. And if the investigator isn't good, then we file again. Different county office, different angle. We keep filing until someone competent walks through that door. That's aggressive, Preach said. That's necessary, Briggs said. And that was the most words Briggs had spoken in a single exchange in the 3 years Boone had known him. The plan took shape over the next 48 hours. Briggs filed the anonymous report through the state's digital portal, clean, detailed, specific enough to trigger action, but carefully worded to avoid any connection to the garage or its inhabitants. Delilah continued building the financial profile on Darren Lusk, tracing property records and corporate filings through 3 states. Coyote maintained surveillance on the Granger house, rotating positions every 4 hours to avoid pattern detection. Mercer, still simmering from the argument, ran background on Wade's business associates, looking for anyone who might have seen behind the mask and been willing to talk. And Boone waited. He hated waiting the way some men hated closed spaces, with a visceral, physical rejection that settled into his muscles and made his hands shake when he wasn't holding a wrench. He worked on the Sportster. He rebuilt a carburetor that didn't need rebuilding. He drank coffee that had been on the burner too long and tasted like regret. On Tuesday evening, Wade Granger made his move. Coyote called it in at 6:15 p.m. There's a car at the house, county plates. Someone's going inside. CPS? Boone asked. Has to be. Briggs's report. They're responding. Boone stood in the garage doorway, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the cold November air push against his face. This was the moment. The system, the same system that had failed for 12 years, was walking through Wade Granger's front door. If it worked, they'd have an official record, a foothold, something to build on. If it didn't work, Wade would know someone had called, and he'd accelerate. The call lasted 47 minutes. Coyote stayed on the line, narrating in terse fragments. Investigator went inside, lights on in the living room. I can see 3 figures through the curtains, 2 adults, 1 child. 4th figure just entered. That's Wade. He's shaking the investigator's hand. Of course he was. Shaking hands was what Wade did. It was the first tool in the kit. The warm grip, the direct eye contact, the smile that said, I have nothing to hide, which was always the smile of a man who had everything to hide. 47 minutes. Then the investigator left, walked to the county car, sat inside for a few minutes, writing notes, presumably, and drove away. Well, Boone said. Can't tell from here. No visible disturbance. House looks normal. Normal is what he does. 20 minutes later, Ivy called. She'd memorized the garage's number, written it nowhere, stored it only in her head, because she understood, instinctively and terribly, that anything written could be found. The lady came, Ivy said. Her voice was flattened, pressed thin. She talked to Mom. She talked to Wade. She looked at my room. She asked if I felt safe. What did you say? I said yes. The word hit Boone like a physical blow. Why? Because Wade was standing in the doorway, and the lady, she didn't ask him to leave. She let him stand there while she asked me, and Mom was sitting on the couch with her hands in her lap, and that face she makes when she's trying not to exist. Ivy's breathing changed, faster, ragged, the composure cracking at the edges. She was nice, the lady, but she didn't see anything. She saw what Wade wanted her to see. Boone closed his eyes. The fluorescent light pressed against his eyelids in a dull orange glow. He thought about Briggs saying the system was supposed to work differently from how it actually worked. He thought about 12 years of Wade perfecting his performance. He thought about an 8-year-old girl standing in her own bedroom, being asked if she felt safe, and saying yes because the man who controlled her life was standing 6 feet away, and the professional whose job was to recognize that dynamic had failed to remove him from the room. Ivy, listen to me. He's angry now. He knows someone called. He's downstairs in the basement. I can hear the dial. Ivy, I have to go. He's coming up. The line went dead. Boone held the phone against his ear for 10 seconds after the call ended. Then he set it on the workbench with a precision that took all the control he had, because the alternative was throwing it through the wall. Hatchet was already standing, already reading it on Boone's face. CPS came and went, Boone said. Saw nothing, did nothing. And Wade knows someone's watching. And he's accelerating. The garage fell into the kind of silence that preceded either collapse or decision. Boone reached into his pocket, felt the 3 pennies, cold copper against his fingertips. Preach stepped forward. His expression had changed. The clinical distance was gone, replaced by something harder, something that looked like the face he'd worn in Kandahar when the morphine ran out, and the medevac was 40 minutes away, and the only option was to keep working with bare hands and brutal focus. Then we stopped building the case around the system, Preach said. We build it around Claire. She's the key. She always was. If she talks, voluntarily, on the record, to a prosecutor, everything changes. Testimony from the victim is the one thing Wade can't stage manage. She won't talk, Boone said. She's terrified. Then we unterrify her. We show her the exit and we make damn sure she believes it's real. How? Preach looked at Hatchet. Hatchet looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the stool where Ivy sat, empty now, and said the thing none of them wanted to say. Someone she trusts needs to reach her. Someone inside her daily life. Not us. Not the county. Someone who can sit with her without Wade knowing and say the words she needs to hear. There's no one, Boone said. He's cut everyone off. Not everyone. Briggs adjusted his glasses. She goes to work. The clinic. 5 days a week. She interacts with coworkers, patients. There has to be someone there. A friend, even a casual one, who's noticed something. Mercer pulled out his phone. I'll run the clinic staff, see who's worked there longest, who's closest to Claire. Quietly, Boone said. Always. They dispersed. Not quickly. Slowly, the way men leave a room when they know what's coming and want to hold the moment a beat longer. Hatchet clapped Boone on the shoulder. Coyote pocketed his unlit cigarette. Preach paused at the door, turned back. Boone, yeah. What I said earlier about Lily, about substitution. You said what needed to be said. I know, but I want you to hear this part too. Preach's eyes held steady, dark, unblinking, the eyes of a man who'd held dying soldiers and never looked away. Even if it is substitution, even if part of why you're doing this is because you couldn't save her, it doesn't make it wrong. It makes it human. And sometimes human is the only fuel we've got. He left. The door groaned shut. Boone stood alone in the garage with the fluorescents buzzing and the rain starting again, and the pennies in his pocket and the photograph in the drawer and the knowledge, certain now, bone deep, irreversible, that the system had been given its chance and the system had failed, and what came next would depend entirely on men the system had already written off. He pulled out his phone, dialed Delilah. The CPS visit was a dead end, he said. We need everything you have on Darren Lusk. Every address, every associate, every transaction, and I need it by Friday. Boone, if I pull that deep, there's no covering the trail. He'll know someone's excavating his past. He already knows. The clock was always ticking. Now it's just louder. He hung up, walked to the workbench, opened the desk drawer, moved the invoices, moved the bourbon, picked up the photograph. His daughter smiled up at him. Missing teeth, brown hair, a laugh frozen in silver halide, permanent and unreachable. I couldn't get there in time, he said to the photograph, to the empty garage, to the 4 years of silence that had accumulated like sediment in a river that had stopped flowing. But I'm here now. He set the photograph upright on the desk, face forward, visible. For the first time in 4 years, Lily Ryder looked out at the garage where her father worked, and Boone didn't look away. Then his phone buzzed, a text from Coyote, 6 words. Wade just put the house for sale. 3 weeks had become no weeks. The clock wasn't ticking anymore. It had stopped. The listing went live at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Coyote screenshotted it from 3 different real estate sites. Same photos, same description, same price point, set 15% below market value. A man who wanted to negotiate would price high. A man who wanted to disappear would price to sell fast. Wade Granger, Darren Lusk, whoever he was underneath the layers of reinvention, had priced to disappear. Boone stood in the garage staring at Coyote's phone, and the fluorescent light above him flickered once, twice, and held. The listing photos showed the house on Ridgeview Terrace in its Sunday best. Hardwood floors gleaming, kitchen spotless, a vase of flowers on the dining table that had probably been placed there by a woman whose bruise was still fresh beneath her hair. The description read, charming colonial in established neighborhood, motivated seller, quick close preferred, quick close. 2 words that meant Claire and Ivy had days, not weeks. When did he contact the realtor? Boone asked. Listing agent is Marcy Holden, office on 5th Street. She uploaded the photos today, but the contract was signed 4 days ago. Coyote pocketed his phone. 4 days, Boone. He signed with the realtor the same day the CPS investigator came to the house. He was already moving before we filed the report. We didn't accelerate his timeline. We confirmed it. The implication settled over the garage like exhaust fumes. Toxic, invisible, impossible to ignore. Wade hadn't reacted to their interference. He'd anticipated it. Every move they'd made, the surveillance, the anonymous tip, the careful legal maneuvering, had been factored into a calculation Wade had already completed. They weren't behind schedule. They'd never been on the same schedule. They'd been playing a game whose rules Wade had written years ago, and the only reason they were still in it was because Wade hadn't yet decided they were worth eliminating. Hatchet arrived at 11. He came through the side door with cold air clinging to his jacket and rain darkening the shoulders of his leather. His prosthetic hand carried a manila folder, and the way he set it on the workbench, carefully, the way a man sets down something that might detonate, told Boone that whatever was inside had changed the shape of the problem. Talk, Boone said. Mercer ran the clinic staff like you asked. Claire's co-workers. 8 full-time employees at the county clinic. 3 of them have worked there longer than Claire. One of them, a nurse named Donna Ray, has been there 11 years. Mercer made contact, casual, said he was looking for a family doctor, asked about the staff. Donna mentioned Claire without being prompted. Said she was quiet. Said she used to be different. Said she stopped eating lunch in the break room about a year ago. That's not what's in the folder. No. Hatchet opened the manila folder. Inside was a single printed page, an email, forwarded through 3 accounts to strip the metadata, originating from an address Boone didn't recognize. This came through Delilah's network, one of her contacts in Virginia, a retired clerk who worked in the courthouse where Wade changed his name. She remembered the filing because it was unusual. Name changes are routine, but this one came with a sealed court order. The judge who signed it was a guy named Randall Whitmore, Circuit Court, Tazewell County. Sealed order means the records are locked. Sealed order means someone with authority wanted the old name buried, and here's where it gets ugly. Hatchet tapped the printed page. Randall Whitmore retired from the bench in 2016. Before retiring, he presided over the estate settlement for Jolene Mackey, Wade's first wife, the one who died in the car accident. Whitmore signed off on the accident ruling. He sealed the name change. And 18 months later, he retired to a property in Roanoke that was purchased through a shell company Delilah traced back to a holding group connected to Wade's business interests. The garage contracted. The walls didn't move, but the air between them did, compressing, thickening, filling with the shape of something Boone had suspected but hadn't fully seen until now. The judge was bought, Boone said. The judge was owned. And if Wade owns a judge, the question isn't what else he's hiding. The question is how deep the hole goes. Boone picked up the printed page. Read it. Read it again. The letters blurred and resharpened, and somewhere behind his ribs the fury he'd been containing shifted from hot to cold. The kind of cold that didn't burn but froze, that turned everything it touched into something harder and more precise. Delilah knows about this? Delilah's the one who found it. She also said something else. Hatchett paused. The hesitation was uncharacteristic. Hatchett didn't hesitate. He assessed, decided, and moved. The fact that he was pausing now meant the next sentence was going to land hard. She said to tell you that she received a phone call 2 hours ago, unlisted number, male voice. The voice said, "Tell your friends in Blackwater Ridge that curiosity has consequences." Then the line went dead. The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was the space between detonation and impact, the microsecond where the shockwave exists but hasn't arrived. "He knows about Delilah," Boone said. "He knows about all of us. Or enough." The CPS report tipped him. Our surveillance tipped him. And now whoever's feeding him information has connected the dots to Delilah's inquiries in Virginia. Whoever's feeding him information. Boone repeated the words slowly, testing them, feeling the edges. "You're saying he has someone local, someone watching us the way we've been watching him." Hatchett didn't blink. "I'm saying a man who bought a circuit court judge in Virginia didn't move to a town like Blackwater Ridge without establishing assets. And I'm saying we need to consider the possibility that one of those assets is someone we haven't identified yet. Someone close." The word close hung in the air between them. Suspended, rotating, showing different faces depending on the angle. Close to Wade. Close to the investigation. Close to the men sitting in this garage. Boone looked at Hatchett. Hatchett looked back. And for the first time in 19 years of partnership, there was a question in the space between them that neither man wanted to ask, because asking it meant acknowledging that the brotherhood, the thing they'd built their lives around, the one structure that had held when everything else collapsed, might have a crack in its foundation. "No," Boone said, flat, final. "Not one of ours." "I'm not saying it is. I'm saying we can't rule it out without knowing for sure. I know these men." "You knew them 4 years ago." "You've been in this garage for 4 years, Boone. People change. Circumstances change. Debts accumulate." Hatchett's voice carried no accusation, only the mechanical precision of a man who'd survived combat by never assuming anything. "I'm not questioning loyalty. I'm questioning exposure. Every man at that table has a life outside this garage. Jobs, families, vulnerabilities. If Wade is the kind of man who buys judges, he's the kind of man who buys leverage. And leverage doesn't always look like money. Sometimes it looks like a secret someone can't afford to have told." Boone turned away. He walked to the far end of the garage, past the tool racks and the hydraulic lift and the folding table where Coyote and Briggs played cards on slow nights. He stood with his back to Hatchett, facing the cinder block wall where someone had scratched the Iron Drifter's motto years ago with a box cutter, "Ride until the road ends." The words had faded. The grooves remained. He thought about Preach's words from the meeting, about substitution, about running toward a fire because the cold was worse. He thought about whether Preach had been right, whether every decision he'd made since Ivy walked through that door was compromised by grief and guilt and the desperate need to rewrite a story that had already ended. Then he thought about Ivy's voice on the phone. "He's coming up," the line going dead. The click that sounded like a door closing on something that couldn't be reopened. "Call a meeting," Boone said without turning around. "Tonight. Everyone. And Hatchett." "Yeah. Don't tell them about the phone call to Delilah. Not yet. I want to see their faces when I tell them myself." The meeting happened at 1 a.m. in the garage with the bay doors closed and the lights dimmed to the 2 fluorescent tubes that still worked after the others burned out, and nobody replaced them. 6 men. Same configuration. Same stool, same workbench, same coffee that had been on the burner so long it had developed what Coyote called personality. But the energy was different, compressed. The air in the room tasted like ozone before a lightning strike. Boone told them about the house listing. He told them about the sealed court order and the retired judge and the property in Roanoke. He told them about Jolene Mackey's death, the single car accident, the absent toxicology, the 48-hour sign-off. He laid it out piece by piece, the way a mechanic lays out engine parts on a clean cloth, each one connected to the next, each one necessary for the machine to function. Then he told them about the phone call. 2 hours ago, someone called Delilah. Untraceable number, male voice. Tell your friends in Blackwater Ridge that curiosity has consequences. The room didn't react the way Boone expected. There was no eruption, no profanity, no slamming of hands on workbenches. Instead, there was a settling, a collective downshift, like an engine dropping from fourth gear to second, the RPMs climbing as the speed decreased, everything getting tighter and louder and closer to the point where metal either held or broke. Mercer spoke first. He's threatening us directly now. He's threatening Delilah, which means he's threatening the investigation, which means he knows how far we've gotten. Or he's guessing, Preach said. A man like this, a man who controls through intimidation, doesn't need specifics. He just needs to make you believe he has them. The phone call could be a fishing expedition. Rattle the cage, see what falls out. Could be, Boone said. But I'm not betting Claire and Ivy's safety on could be. He let the words settle. Then he watched their faces. All of them, one by one. Hatchet, who met his gaze with the steady blankness of a man who knew he was being read and had nothing to hide. Coyote, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the way it always did when operational security was compromised. Briggs, glasses reflecting the fluorescent light, expression unreadable behind the lenses. Preach, arms folded, head slightly tilted, processing. Mercer, leaning forward, hands clasped between his knees, the vein in his forearm visible and pulsing. Nobody looked away. Nobody shifted. Nobody did the thing that guilty men did in moments of scrutiny. The micro-glance toward the exit, the adjustment of weight from one foot to the other, the swallow that came a half-second too late. But Boone had been an enforcer long enough to know that the absence of tells was, in some men, the most dangerous tell of all. From this point forward, he said, operational information is compartmentalized. Nobody knows everything. Each of you gets the piece you need to do your job and nothing more. If there's a leak, and I'm not saying there is, compartmentalization limits the damage. You're saying you don't trust us. Mercer's voice was level, but something beneath it vibrated. I'm saying I don't trust the situation. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. One of them is personal. The other keeps people alive. Mercer held Boone's stare for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then he exhaled through his nose, a sound like a pressure valve releasing, and sat back. Fine. Compartmentalized. What's my piece? Claire. Tomorrow. At the clinic. You walk in as a patient. First visit. New to the area. You sit in the waiting room and you find Donna Ray, the nurse who mentioned Claire. You don't talk to Claire directly. You talk to Donna. You find out if Claire has ever said anything, about wanting to leave, about being afraid, about needing help. And you find out if Donna would be willing to carry a message. What message? That there's a way out, and that someone is standing at the other end of it. Mercer nodded, stood, left without another word. The door groaned behind him. Boone turned to Coyote. The house listing. I need to know who's looking at it. Every showing, every potential buyer. If Wade has a specific buyer lined up, someone to fast-track the sale, I need a name. Coyote pulled the unlit cigarette from behind his ear, placed it between his lips, and didn't light it. I'll camp the realtor's office. Marcy Holden's a gossip. Shouldn't be hard. Briggs. The CPS report failed, but the failure itself is documentation. File a complaint with the State Oversight Office about the investigator's conduct, specifically allowing the alleged abuser to remain in the room during the child interview. That's a procedural violation. It won't trigger an immediate reinvestigation, but it creates a paper trail that a prosecutor can use later. Briggs nodded once. Precise. Military. Preach. You're on Delilah. She's exposed. If Wade is tracing her inquiries, she needs to go dark on the Virginia angle. Have her switch to the financial side. Corporate filings, shell companies, property transactions. Anything that connects Darren Lusk's old life to Wade Granger's money. And route everything through cutouts. No direct contact with sources. Preach uncrossed his arms. And what about you? I'm going to talk to Sandra. The room shifted. It was subtle. A collective intake of breath, a micro-adjustment of posture. But it was there, Sandra Beckett, Wade's second wife. The woman who had run and was still running. The one person alive who had survived Wade's system from the inside and come out the other side with her life, if not her name. She doesn't want to be found, Hatchett said. She's already been found. Delilah found her, which means Wade can find her too, if he hasn't already. I'm not going there to drag her into this. I'm going there to warn her, and if she's willing, only if, to ask her what's in that safe. The meeting ended at 2:17 a.m. The men filed out into the November cold, their breath visible in the parking lot light, their bikes and trucks starting up one at a time in a staggered sequence that was instinct, not coordination. Leaving together attracted attention, and attention was the one resource they couldn't afford to spend. Boone stood in the doorway and watched them go. The last to leave was Hatchett, who paused beside his bike, a blacked-out road king with no chrome and no apology, and looked back at Boone across 30 feet of cracked asphalt. You didn't tell them everything, Hatchett said. No. The judge, the property purchase, the shell company. That's not just domestic abuse, Boone. That's organized corruption. That's a man with a network. I know. Do you? Because if Wade Granger has a network, law enforcement, judiciary, maybe local government, then every official channel we're trying to use might be compromised. The CPS report didn't just fail because the investigator was bad. It might have failed because someone made a phone call. The thought had already occurred to Boone. It had occurred to him in the back office, staring at the photograph of his daughter, feeling the weight of 3 pennies in his pocket and the weight of something much heavier in his chest. The thought that the system wasn't just broken. The thought that, in Blackwater Ridge, the system might be owned. Get some sleep, Boone said. That's not an answer. It's all I've got tonight. Hatchett rode away. The sound of his engine faded down Ridgeline Road, swallowed by the dark and the rain and the vast indifference of a town that was dying by inches and didn't know it yet. Boone went back inside, locked the door, sat at the desk. Lily's photograph watched him from its new position, upright, forward-facing, the smile unchanged by the 4 years it had spent face down in a drawer. He pulled the 3 pennies from his pocket and set them on the desk beside the photograph. 2 artifacts. 2 girls. 1 lost. 1 found. And between them, a man who was trying to build a bridge across a gap that might be too wide to cross. His phone rang at 3:04 a.m. The number was local. He didn't recognize it. Mr. Ryder? The voice was female, thin, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. This is Claire. Claire Holloway. Please don't hang up. Boone's hand tightened on the phone. I'm here. Ivy told me. About the garage. About the pennies. About you. A pause. Breathing. Not crying. Something beyond crying, the airless space where tears had been used up, and what remained was just raw nerve and desperation. I don't have long. He's asleep. He took something, pills, I think. He'll be out until 5. Where are you? The bathroom. The fan is on. He can't hear me over the fan. Boone pressed the phone harder against his ear, as if proximity could close the distance between the garage and the house on Ridgeview Terrace. Claire, listen. No, you listen. Please. Her voice cracked, reassembled, cracked again. He's selling the house. He's already found a place, somewhere in Montana. I don't know the city. He showed me pictures on his laptop and said we're leaving after Thanksgiving. He said if I tell anyone, he'll take Ivy. He has a lawyer. Not here, somewhere else. And the lawyer has paperwork already drawn up. Custody. Full custody. He said the court will side with him because of his reputation and because of She stopped. The fan hummed in the background, a white noise cocoon that was the only thing standing between this conversation and discovery. Because of what, Claire? Silence. 10 seconds. 15. Because of what he put in my medical records. Boone's blood went cold. Not metaphorically, literally. He felt the temperature in his extremities drop, the way it did in the moments before combat, the body pulling blood to the core, preparing for impact. What did he put in your records? I went to the doctor last year, not the clinic where I work, a different one, a practice in Ashford. He chose the doctor. He drove me. He went into the room with me. He told the doctor I'd been having episodes, paranoia, delusions. He said I'd been making accusations against him that weren't true. He said he was worried about my stability. Her voice was mechanical now, reciting facts the way Ivy recited her notebook entries. Detached, survival mode, the emotion walled off behind a barrier that would hold until it didn't. The doctor wrote it down. All of it. Diagnosis, adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. Recommendation, medication, and ongoing monitoring. Wade filled the prescription. He watches me take the pills every night. What are the pills? I don't know. They make me tired, foggy, like I'm thinking through cotton. Boone's free hand gripped the edge of the desk. The wood creaked. He was thinking about the custody paperwork Wade's lawyer had already drawn up, about a family court judge looking at a father with a counsel seat and a charitable record and a doctor's note saying the mother was mentally unstable, about the word of a respected businessman against the word of a woman who'd been medicated into compliance. The architecture of it was pristine, every wall load-bearing, every exit blocked. Wade hadn't just controlled Claire. He'd built a legal cage around her that would survive even if she managed to run. Custody, medical records, a paper trail that painted her as the unstable one, the dangerous one, the one from whom a child needed to be protected. Claire, the pills, do you still have the bottle? In the medicine cabinet. I need you to save them. Don't take them. Hide them. Pretend to swallow, spit them out later. We need the pills analyzed. If they're not what the label says, that's evidence of drugging. That changes everything. He watches me take them. Then you learn to make it look real. Tongue trick, under the cheek, whatever it takes. Mr. Ryder, you don't understand. He watches everything. He sees everything. I can't. You called me at 3 a.m. from a bathroom with the fan running. You can. The line went quiet. The fan hummed. Somewhere outside, a freight train passed through the valley, the long, low horn cutting through the night like a blade through fog. Why are you helping us? Claire asked. Ivy said you're a mechanic, a biker. She said people are afraid of you. Why would you? Because your daughter walked into my garage with 3 pennies and asked me to protect you. And those pennies are sitting on my desk right now, and they're going to stay there until this is over. Claire made a sound, not a word, not a cry. Something more fundamental. The sound of a wall developing its first real crack after years of pressure. The sound of a woman who had been told she was crazy, who had been medicated and monitored and isolated until she'd almost believed it, hearing someone say, I see what's happening and it's real and you're not alone. I have to go, she said. The pills wear off faster on some nights. If he wakes up, Claire, one more thing. Yes, the safe. In the basement, Ivy heard the combination, 22, 14, 31. Do you know what he keeps in there? The silence that followed was different from the others. Longer, heavier, saturated with something that Boone recognized from his years as an enforcer. The silence of someone standing at the edge of a revelation they'd been carrying for years and had never spoken aloud. Files, Claire said. I saw them once. He left the basement door open by accident, 2 years ago maybe. I only looked for a few seconds. There were files, folders with names on them, women's names. Not mine, not Sandra's, others. Names I didn't recognize. Her breathing accelerated. And photographs of houses, of cars, of daily routines, like surveillance, like he was studying them. Yes. How many names? I don't know. I only saw the top 2 folders, but the stack was thick. Mr. Ryder, there were a lot of folders. The freight train was gone. The night was silent except for the rain and the fan, and the sound of two people breathing on opposite ends of a phone line, separated by 3 miles of dark road and connected by the understanding that what they were dealing with was no longer a domestic abuse case. It was a pattern, a system, a machine that Wade Granger had been building and operating for years, maybe decades, selecting, controlling, isolating, and discarding women with the methodical precision of a predator who had never been caught because he'd designed the cage to be invisible from the outside. Claire, Friday, can you get to the clinic early, before your shift? Maybe. If I say I have a meeting, well, there's going to be a woman there, a nurse named Donna Ray. She's going to ask you to have coffee. Say yes. She's going to give you a phone number. Memorize it. Don't write it down. That number reaches me, anytime, day or night. And then what? Boone looked at the photograph of his daughter, at the 3 pennies, at the dark windows of the garage where rain streaked the glass in patterns that looked, in the dim light, like someone trying to write a message no one could read. And then we get you out, both of you, before Thanksgiving, before Montana, before he closes the cage for good. The line went dead. Not abruptly, gently. The click of a woman setting a phone down and turning off the bathroom fan and walking back to a bed where a man who might have killed his first wife slept with pills in his bloodstream and files in his basement and a plan that was 3 steps ahead of everyone trying to stop him. Boone sat at the desk until dawn. He didn't move. He didn't drink. He didn't call anyone. He sat with the pennies and the photograph and the knowledge that the thing he was facing was bigger than a man. It was a system. Wade's system. A system of control and corruption and calculated violence that had been functioning in the shadows for years, protected by money, enabled by silence, sustained by a world that preferred the polished smile to the truth behind it. And he was going to dismantle it with 6 men, a paralegal, and the testimony of a drugged woman and an 8-year-old girl with a purple notebook. The first light of morning came through the garage windows. Gray, reluctant, the light of a day that didn't want to start. Boone reached for his phone, dialed Hatchet. "Wake up." "I'm awake." Claire called, 3 a.m. "And?" "There are files in the safe, folders, women's names, surveillance photographs. Wade's not just doing this to Claire. He's been doing it for years to others. We don't know how many." Hatchet was quiet for a long time. Boone could hear him breathing, slow, deliberate, the controlled respiration of a man processing information that fundamentally altered the tactical landscape. "Then we're not saving one family," Hatchet said. "We're building a case that puts him away for good." "Yes." "And the timeline hasn't changed. He's still moving after Thanksgiving. Which means we have to break Claire out before then and get into that safe before Wade empties it. Because when he runs, those files go with him, and every woman in those folders loses her chance at justice." "How?" Boone stood up, his knees cracked, his back ached. He was 46 years old and hadn't slept in 31 hours, and the weight of what he was carrying had settled into his bones like frost into pavement, deep, structural, the kind that expanded and cracked the surface from within. "I need to see Sandra," he said. "Today. Not this week. Today. If Wade's pattern is what I think it is, Sandra knows things she doesn't even realize she knows. And I need those things before Friday, because Friday is when Claire meets Donna at the clinic. Friday is when we start the clock on extraction. And if anything goes wrong between now and Friday..." His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words. No punctuation. No sender identification. "She belongs to me." Boone stared at the screen. The gray morning light pressed against his face. The pennies sat on the desk. Lily smiled from the photograph. And Boone Ryder, mechanic, exile, ghost, the man who had buried his daughter and buried himself and been dragged back into the world by 3 cents and a child's trembling voice, felt every piece of who he used to be rise from the grave where he'd put it 4 years ago. Not the fury, not the violence, something older, something colder. The enforcer's calculus, the part of him that didn't feel, didn't flinch, didn't negotiate, just identified the threat and removed it from the equation with the efficiency of a man who had learned, in rooms nobody talked about, that mercy was a luxury and precision was a language. He texted back 2 words. Come take her. Then he pocketed the phone, picked up the 3 pennies, and walked out of the garage into a morning that tasted like iron and rain and the end of every pretense he'd been hiding behind since the day his daughter died. Boone drove east before the sun cleared the ridgeline. The F-150 ate highway in the gray pre-dawn, wipers slapping rain off the windshield in a rhythm that matched nothing inside his chest. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The 3 pennies sat in the cup holder beside a gas station coffee he'd bought 60 miles back and hadn't touched. Sandra Beckett's address, the trailer park outside Milford, 240 miles from Blackwater Ridge, glowed on the phone screen mounted to the dash, and every mile that passed felt like a countdown to something that couldn't be undone. He arrived at 11:17 a.m. The trailer park was called Pine Haven, which was a lie. There were no pines and there was no haven, just 30-odd mobile homes arranged on a gravel grid behind a chain-link fence with a gate that didn't close all the way. The rain had turned the ground into a gray slurry that sucked at his boots when he stepped out of the truck. The air smelled like wet metal and wood smoke from someone's chimney. A dog barked somewhere. A television played through thin walls. The kind of place where people lived because the world had run out of other places to put them. Sandra's trailer was at the back of the lot. Number 23. White with a green stripe that had faded to the color of old celery. A wind chime made of spoons hung from the awning, turning slowly in the drizzle without making a sound. The curtains were drawn. A car, a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked taillight, sat in the gravel beside the steps. Boone knocked. 3 times. Steady. The kind of knock that said, I'm not leaving. The curtain moved, a half inch. A single eye appeared in the gap, brown, bloodshot, surrounded by skin that had aged faster than the years should have allowed. Sandra Beckett? Who's asking? My name is Boone Ryder. I'm from Blackwater Ridge. The eye didn't blink. The curtain didn't move. 5 seconds. 10. He sent you. No. He's the reason I'm here. But he didn't send me. That's what they always say. I don't know who they are. I know who I am. I'm a mechanic. I fix motorcycles. And right now I'm trying to fix something a lot more complicated, and I need your help. The curtain dropped. Silence. Boone stood in the rain, feeling it run down the collar of his jacket and along his spine, and he waited because waiting was the only thing he could offer. Patience. Presence. The willingness to stand in someone else's discomfort and not walk away. The door opened. Not all the way. Enough. Sandra Beckett was 43 but looked 60. She was small, 5'3", maybe, with hair pulled back in a way that revealed the architecture of a face that had once been striking and was now a landscape of erosion. She wore a sweatshirt 2 sizes too large and held a cigarette that had burned down to the filter without being smoked. 5 minutes, she said, and you stay by the door. The trailer smelled like coffee and cigarette ash and the particular staleness of a space that hadn't been aired out in weeks. Sandra sat at a small table with a formica top that had a burn mark in the shape of a crescent moon. Boone stood just inside the door, as instructed, his back against the frame, hands visible. He told her about Claire, about Ivy, about the 3 pennies and the purple notebook and the house that was already listed for sale. He told her about the CPS investigation that went nowhere and the name change and the judge in Virginia. He told her what Claire had said about the safe, the folders, the women's names, the surveillance photographs. Sandra listened without expression. When he mentioned the folders, something crossed her face. Not surprise, but confirmation. The look of a woman hearing evidence for something she'd always suspected but never had the courage to verify. How many? She asked. Claire didn't know. She said the stack was thick. Sandra crushed the dead cigarette into an ashtray shaped like a leaf. She immediately lit another. Her hands were steady, but the steadiness was effort, the visible result of a woman who had spent years training herself not to shake. When I was with him, she said, I found a notebook. Not like your girl's notebook. His notebook. Small, leather-bound, in the glove compartment of his truck. He'd left it unlocked. He almost never made mistakes like that. I opened it. She inhaled, let the smoke out through her nose. Names, dates, addresses, notes about their routines, what time they left for work, what time they came home, who their friends were, whether they had family nearby. Her eyes met Boone's. He was shopping, that's what it was, a shopping list. He was selecting the next one. Did you keep the notebook? I put it back. I was too scared to take it. I was too scared to breathe wrong. By the time I decided to run, it was gone. He'd moved it or destroyed it. I had nothing. But you wrote letters to a friend, warning her Ivy found photocopies. Sandra's expression shifted. A crack in the mask, quickly repaired. I wrote those letters to Dina, my college roommate. I thought if something happened to me, at least someone would know. But Wade, whatever he calls himself now, he found them. He found everything eventually. I got lucky. I got out before... She stopped, looked at the tabletop, at the burn mark, at some invisible point beneath the surface where the memories lived. Before Jolene, Boone asked quietly. The name hit Sandra like a physical force. She flinched, actually flinched, a full-body contraction that pulled her shoulders to her ears and her chin to her chest. You know about Jolene? Single car accident, mountain road, no toxicology. It wasn't an accident. Sandra's voice had dropped to a frequency that wasn't quite a whisper and wasn't quite a voice, a sound made by vocal cords that had been suppressed for so long they'd forgotten how to project. She told me, before I married him. She came to see me. She'd heard through someone, I don't know who, that Darren was engaged again. She drove 4 hours to tell me what he was, what he'd done. She showed me bruises that were 6 months old and still discolored. She begged me not to marry him. But you did. I did, because he was standing right there when she left, on the porch, watching her drive away. And when I asked him about it, he was so calm, so reasonable. He said she was unstable. He said she'd been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He said the bruises were self-inflicted. And I believed him because he made it easy to believe him and hard to believe the woman who'd driven 4 hours to save my life. She crushed the second cigarette. Her fingers trembled now. The effort had run out. 6 months after we married, Jolene died. The police called it an accident. I knew it wasn't. And I knew that if I stayed, I'd be the next accident. She looked up at Boone. I ran, changed my name, moved 4 times in 3 years, haven't stopped looking over my shoulder since. Sandra, I need you to testify. No. Claire and Ivy, I said no. I can't. You don't understand what he's capable of. He has people, resources, the judge. You already know about the judge. There are others, local police in the towns where he's lived, business partners who owe him. He builds networks the way other people build houses, brick by brick, until everyone around him is either loyal or afraid. I'm neither. Then you're dead. You just don't know it yet. The words hung in the trailer like smoke. Boone looked at Sandra, at the fear that had calcified into the structure of her face, into the way she held her body, into the architecture of a life that had been reduced to a trailer at the back of a gravel lot with curtains that never opened. He's going to take them to Montana, Boone said. Claire and Ivy. After Thanksgiving. And if he does, we lose them. The way you almost got lost, the way Jolene got lost. Sandra closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet but focused. What do you need? Everything you remember. Dates, locations, names from the notebook. Anything that corroborates what Claire saw in the safe. And I need it on record. Written statement, notarized, something a prosecutor can hold in their hand. And if he finds out, then I'll be standing between you and him. The way I'm going to be standing between Claire and Ivy and him and Sandra, I don't move. She studied him for a long time. The wind chimes spun outside, still silent. The rain tapped on the trailer roof in a pattern that sounded like counting. There's a notary in Milford, she said. Margaret Cho. She does documents for the residents here. Off the books, but legal. I can have a statement ready by tonight. Tonight. If I wait until tomorrow, I'll talk myself out of it. I know myself. It has to be tonight. Boone nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a prepaid phone, one of 4 he'd purchased at a truck stop on the way. This is clean. My number is programmed in. You call no one else. Sandra took the phone. held it like it weighed more than it should. "Mr. Ryder." "Yeah, the safe. Whatever's in there, it's not just evidence. It's his trophy case. He keeps it because he needs to remember what he's done. Because controlling people isn't enough for him. He needs to relive it." She paused. "If you get into that safe, you won't just find files. You'll find the proof that he's been doing this his entire adult life. And that proof is the only thing in the world he's afraid of losing." Boone drove back to Blackwater Ridge through gathering darkness. The highway unreeled in his headlights. Wet asphalt, yellow lines, the occasional semi-throwing spray across his windshield in a wall of gray water. He called Hatchet at the halfway point. "Sandra's writing a statement, notarized by tonight. She'll send it to Delilah through the prepaid." "Good, because things are moving here." "How moving?" "Mercer went to the clinic this morning. Talked to Donna Ray. She's in. She'll carry the message to Claire tomorrow, Friday, as planned. But that's not why I'm calling." Hatchet's voice had the particular flatness that meant he was controlling information the way a demolitions expert controls a charge. Carefully, because the wrong release at the wrong moment would bring down the wrong wall. Coyote followed up on the house listing, the showing schedule. There's one buyer who's already been through twice. Fast-tracked, private viewing both times, after hours. The buyer's name is registered through a holding company called Granite Peak Ventures. Let me guess. Same company that bought the judge's retirement property in Roanoke. Wade isn't selling the house on the open market, Boone. He's transferring it to himself, through the shell company. A paper transaction to make it look like a sale, while he pockets the equity and vanishes the ownership trail. When he moves to Montana, the house here won't be linked to his name. Nothing will. He's not running. He's erasing. Boone's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white in the dashboard glow. Erasing. The same thing he'd done before. The same thing he'd done with Jolene, with Sandra, with his own name. A man who didn't just leave, who eliminated every trace that he'd ever been there, so that the next town, the next wife, the next victim started from zero with no history and no warnings. "Friday," Boone said. "Everything happens Friday." "You sure?" "He's moving the timeline. The house transfer is happening now. Once that closes, there's nothing keeping him in Blackwater Ridge. We get Claire out Friday, or we don't get her out." He pulled into the garage at 9:42 p.m. The lights were on. Preach was inside, sitting on the stool that Ivy had claimed, which was the only time anyone else had sat on it, and the act felt like a violation even though Preach didn't know it. Briggs stood by the coffee maker. Coyote leaned against the lift with his arms folded and his unlit cigarette behind his ear. Mercer was absent, still running surveillance. Boone didn't sit. He stood at the workbench and laid it out. Sandra's statement, incoming, the shell company connection, the house transfer, the Friday timeline, Claire's cooperation, tentative and terrified but real, the pills, the safe, the folders, all of it. When he finished, Preach stood up, walked to within 3 feet of Boone, looked him dead in the eyes. "You're talking about extracting a woman and child from the custody of a man who has corrupted a judge, possibly killed a previous wife, and has established a surveillance network that we haven't fully mapped. You're talking about doing it in 48 hours, with 6 men, no warrants, and no legal authority. I'm talking about getting them somewhere safe while Delilah compiles everything. Sandra's statement, the financial records, the CPS complaint, Claire's testimony about the pills and the safe, into a package that we hand to the State Attorney General's office. Not local prosecutors. Not county law enforcement, state level, above anything Wade might have compromised. And the safe? If Claire can confirm what's inside, we include that in the referral. Let the AG's office get the warrant. Let them open it with a legal key. That's the smart play. That's the only play. Preach nodded. Then, what about Wade? When Claire doesn't come home Friday, he'll know. And a man like that, cornered, exposed, losing control for the first time, is the most dangerous version of himself. Which is why Claire and Ivy won't be anywhere he can find them. Where? Boone looked at Hatchet. Hatchet, who had been leaning against the far wall in his customary position, straightened and spoke for the first time. Ironwood Lodge, 57 miles north, off-grid property owned by a member of the northern chapter who hasn't used it in 3 years. No paper trail connecting it to anyone in Blackwater Ridge. Generator power. Stocked. I made the call this afternoon. Without consulting the table, Preach said. I'm consulting the table now. The room held, Coyote shifted his weight. Briggs cleaned his glasses. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, the mundane, oblivious sound of a machine performing its function regardless of the human gravity surrounding it. Friday, Boone said. Claire's shift at the clinic starts at 8. Wade drops her off. He drives to his office. Ivy goes to school. Between 8:15 and 8:45, Donna Ray walks Claire out of the clinic through the service entrance. Mercer picks them up in a vehicle Wade hasn't seen. They go to the school. Ivy's already been told. Claire will tell her Thursday night. The three of them drive north. Hatchet leads on the bike. Briggs follows in a second vehicle. By the time Wade shows up at the clinic to pick Claire up at 5, she's been gone for 9 hours and she's behind a locked door 57 miles away. And the rest of us? Coyote stays on Wade, eyes on. The moment he realizes Claire is gone, we need to know. Preach coordinates with Delilah. The package goes to the AG's office Friday afternoon. Time to land after Claire is secure. I stay here. Why here? Because Wade will come here. When he figures it out, this is the first place he'll come. And I need to be standing in this garage when he walks through that door. Alone, Mon? Hatchet said. He needs to see me alone. He needs to believe this is personal. One man, not an organization. If he sees the club, he calls his lawyer, invokes his rights, plays the victim. If he sees me, he talks. And when he talks, I record every word. That's bait, Preach said. You're making yourself bait. I'm making myself the last thing he sees before the walls close in. Preach studied him. The clinical gaze, the one that assessed structural integrity, the way an engineer assessed a bridge, looking for the stress point that would fail under load. And if he doesn't talk? If he comes through that door with something other than words? Boone pulled the 3 pennies from his pocket, set them on the workbench. The click of copper on steel. 3 small sounds that had become, over the span of 2 weeks, the percussion section of something none of them had expected to feel again. Then I handle it. Boone, I've handled worse. No one argued, not because they agreed, because they knew. Thursday passed in fragments. Mercer confirmed the clinic route, service entrance, blind spot in the parking lot camera, 4-minute window between Wade's departure and the start of the morning shift overlap. Hatchet rode north to Ironwood Lodge and reported back, heat working, water running, pantry stocked with enough for 2 weeks. Briggs filed the CPS procedural complaint with the State Oversight Office, time-stamped and documented. Coyote mapped Wade's Thursday routine, office at 9, lunch at the desk, 2 phone calls to unlisted numbers in the early afternoon, home by 5:30. Delilah sent the financial package to Preach at 4 p.m. 47 pages of corporate filings, property transfers, and shell company connections linking Darren Wade Lusk to assets in 3 states and a retired judge in Roanoke. Sandra's notarized statement arrived at 6 p.m. 9 handwritten pages describing her marriage, her escape, the notebook she'd found in the glove compartment, and the names she remembered from its pages. 3 names. 3 women. All of whom had, according to Sandra, been in contact with Darren Lusk in the years before Sandra met him, and none of whom she'd been able to find afterward. 3 names that might correspond to 3 of the folders in the safe. Boone read the statement at the workbench with Lily's photograph watching and the pennies beside it, and the bourbon bottle unopened for the first time in longer than he could remember. He read Sandra's words, careful, precise, shaking with the effort of reconstruction. And he felt the architecture of Wade's life laid bare. Not a man, a machine, a system that selected, isolated, controlled, and disposed with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had removed empathy from the equation so long ago that its absence had become structural. He put the statement down, picked up his phone, called Ivy. She answered on the second ring, whispering. "Is everything ready?" she asked. "Everything's ready. Your mom knows?" "She told me tonight, after he went to the basement. She held my hand and said we're leaving tomorrow and we're not coming back." Ivy paused. She was shaking, but she said it. She actually said it. "How are you?" "Scared?" "Good. Scared means you're paying attention. Mr. Ryder? Yeah. The pennies. My dad's pennies. You still have them. Right here, on my desk. When this is over, can I have them back? Boone closed his eyes. Opened them. The photograph. The pennies. The girl's voice in his ear, asking for the only thing her dead father had left behind, the 3 small pieces of copper she'd spent as currency in a transaction no child should ever have to make. Kid, he said, when this is over, I'm putting those pennies in a frame and hanging them on the wall. And every time you walk into this garage, you're going to see them. And you're going to remember that you were brave enough to ask for help when the whole world told you not to. That sounds like a yes. That's a yes. Friday arrived the way storms arrive, with pressure. Boone was at the garage by 5 a.m., coffee, no food, the bay doors closed, the overhead lights on, every tool in its place. The workbench clear except for the photograph, the pennies, and a digital recorder the size of a cigarette lighter that Preach had provided from a source he didn't name. At 7:52 a.m., Coyote texted, Wade and Claire leaving the house now. Ivy in the back seat. School drop-off first. 7:59. Ivy dropped at Millbrook Elementary. Wade and Claire proceeding to clinic. 8:11. Claire dropped at clinic entrance. Wade observed departure, heading toward downtown office. 8:14. Wade's vehicle confirmed at office parking structure. 8:16. Mercer's voice on the phone, low and controlled. Donna's got her. Service entrance. Claire's in the car. Boone, she's crying, but she's moving. Ivy? Briggs is at the school. Pick up in 4 minutes. We told the front office it's a family emergency. Briggs has the authorization letter Claire signed last night. 8:22. Briggs texting from the school parking lot. Ivy secured. She's calm. She asked me if Mr. Ryder knows we're going. Boone read the text, typed back. Tell her the pennies are waiting. 8:31. Hatchet, calling from the highway north of town. I'm on the road. They're behind me. Both vehicles. Claire and Ivy in Mercer's car. Briggs trailing. ETA to Ironwood, 90 minutes. Any tales? Clean. Nobody behind us but rain. 8:34. Coyote. Wade still at office. No movement. The garage was silent. Boone stood at the workbench, hands flat on the steel surface, and felt the minutes pass like individual heartbeats, each one distinct, each one heavier than the last. He thought about Claire in the back of Mercer's car, watching Blackwater Ridge shrink in the mirror. About Ivy, calm because calm was the only armor she knew, sitting with a backpack full of everything she owned and a purple notebook full of everything Wade had done. About Hatchet on the Road King, leading them north through rain and fog toward a lodge where the doors locked from the inside and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles of forest away. He thought about Lily, about the hospital room, about the machines that beeped and then stopped. He thought about 3 pennies, about what they'd purchased, about the debt they'd created, not from Ivy to him, but from him to the world. A debt of presence, of standing where it mattered, of not leaving even when leaving was easier, even when the cold and the dark and the absence of his daughter made every day feel like a room with no windows. 10:14 a.m. Hatchet called. They're inside. Lodge is secure. Claire and Ivy are safe. Put Ivy on. A pause. Shuffling. Then her voice, small and far away, and for the first time since he'd met her, something close to light. We made it, she said. You made it. Is it over? Boone looked at the garage door, at the gray light pressing against the glass, at the workbench where the recorder sat beside the photograph and the pennies. Almost, he said. One more thing. He hung up, set the phone down, turned on the recorder, and waited. At 5:17 p.m., Coyote's final text arrived. Wade at clinic, went inside, came out running. He's in the car. He's heading your way. Fast. Boone read the message, pocketed the phone, walked to the center of the garage, the open space between the 2 service bays, the oil-stained concrete where he'd rebuilt 1,000 engines and never once rebuilt himself. He stood there with his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands at his sides and the recorder running in the breast pocket of his jacket and the pennies in the other pocket, and the photograph on the desk behind him, where Lily smiled and the rain hammered the roof like the drum roll before a verdict. Headlights swept across the garage windows at 5:29, tires on gravel, an engine shutting off. Not the rumble of a Harley, but the refined purr of a European sedan, a vehicle purchased to project exactly the kind of success that made people trust you. A car door. Footsteps. Fast. Hard-soled shoes on wet gravel transitioning to the metallic clang of the garage's side entrance. The door opened. Wade Granger stood in the frame. 44 years old, 6 feet even. A gray overcoat over a dress shirt, hair still arranged, shoes still polished. But the face? The face had changed. The smile was gone. The public mask had slipped, and what was underneath was something Boone recognized from years of dealing with men who controlled everything until the moment they couldn't. Panic. Not the wild, flailing kind. The compressed kind. The kind that looked like calm from a distance, but up close revealed itself as a coiled fury searching for a target. "Where is she?" Wade said. Boone didn't move. "You'll have to be more specific. There are a lot of she's in your life, aren't there, Darren?" The name landed. Wade's left eye twitched, a single involuntary spasm, the kind that no amount of practice could suppress. He stepped into the garage. The door swung shut behind him. The fluorescent light caught his face from above, carving shadows under his cheekbones that made him look exactly like what he was. "You don't know what you've done," Wade said. His voice was controlled, barely, the seams showing. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Darren Wade Lusk, born Harlan County. Married Jolene Mackey, 2007. Jolene died 2009. Single car accident that wasn't investigated because Judge Randall Whitmore signed off in 48 hours, possibly because you paid for his retirement property through Granite Peak Ventures. Married Sandra, who ran. Changed your name. Moved to Blackwater Ridge. Married Claire. Same pattern, same system, same cage, different locks." Boone recited it without inflection, without emotion. The enforcer's voice, the one that delivered facts the way a surgeon delivered incisions, precise and without anesthesia. "Did I miss anything? Maybe the notebook Sandra found in your glove compartment? The one with names and routines? Or the folders in your basement safe? Combination 22, 14, 31. The ones Claire saw? The ones with women's names?" Wade didn't move, but something behind his eyes recalculated. A visible recalibration, the machine recalculating routes when the primary path was blocked. Boone watched it happen, watched the panic compress into something harder, something more dangerous. "None of that is admissible," Wade said. "Everything you just described was obtained illegally. No warrant, no authority, a paralegal's fishing expedition, and the ramblings of a mentally unstable woman and an 8-year-old child." "Funny thing about mentally unstable women," Boone said. "Claire stopped taking your pills 3 days ago. Whatever you've been feeding her, whatever you had that doctor prescribe to keep her foggy and compliant, she's been spitting them out. And those pills are now in the hands of a lab that's going to tell us exactly what they are. Paired with Sandra's notarized statement, paired with Claire's testimony, paired with your CPS procedural violation. Investigator let you stand in the room during the child interview, which is now part of a formal state complaint." Wade's composure cracked another inch. "You're a mechanic, a biker. You have a criminal record and a dead daughter, and a garage that smells like failure. No court in this country is going to take your word over mine." The dead daughter. The words were calculated, aimed, designed to destabilize. Boone felt them hit, felt them punch through the armor he'd rebuilt and strike the wound beneath, the one that never healed, the one that bled when the temperature changed and the wind came through the windows and the nights lasted longer than his ability to hold them at bay. But he didn't flinch. He held, the way a wall holds against flood, not by being stronger than the water, but by being exactly where it needs to be. "You're right," Boone said. "I'm nobody, which is why I'm not the one bringing the case. The State Attorney General's office received a 47-page filing at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Financial records, property transfers, corporate filings connecting Darren Lusk to Granite Peak Ventures to Judge Whitmore's retirement property. Sandra Beckett's notarized statement naming you as the man who controlled her, terrorized her and whose first wife died under suspicious circumstances you benefited from. Claire Holloway's written account of the drugging, the isolation, the surveillance, and a formal request to open an investigation into the death of Jolene Mackey. He paused. Let the words occupy the space between them. I'm nobody, Wade. But the people reading that filing right now, they're everybody. Wade's face underwent a transformation. Not dramatic, not cinematic, worse. A slow collapse, like a building settling onto a foundation that had been compromised for years. The mask didn't fall off. It dissolved. And what remained was not a monster, not a movie villain with a sneer and a monologue, but a man. A small man. A man whose power had always been constructed from other people's fear, and whose entire identity was, in this moment, revealing itself to be nothing more than architecture without foundation. I want to see my wife, Wade said. The control was gone. The voice was raw. She's not your wife anymore. She's a witness. She'll come back. She always comes back. They all come back. Not this time. You don't understand. What you need doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what's in that safe. 22, 14, 31. When the AG's office gets their warrant, and they will, those folders are going to tell a story that you've spent your entire life making sure no one heard. Wade looked at Boone, and in his eyes, past the panic, past the fury, past the crumbling machinery of control, there was something Boone hadn't expected. Recognition. The recognition of one damaged man looking at another and seeing for the first time someone who wasn't afraid. She paid you, Wade said. The girl, Ivy, she paid you with coins. 3 pennies. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Wade reached into his overcoat. Boone's body shifted. Weight forward, hands rising, every nerve firing the instinct of a man who'd spent years in rooms where reaching into a coat meant something specific and irreversible. But what Wade produced wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. He held it up, and on the screen was a photograph. Ivy's school, taken from the parking lot, time-stamped that morning. I know where she goes to school, Wade said. I know her teacher's name, her bus number. I know everything about her because she's mine. She's been mine since the day her mother signed the marriage certificate. And if you think a filing with the Attorney General is going to change that, it already has. The sound came from the side door. Both men turned. Standing in the entrance, rain dripping from the brim of a county sheriff's hat, was a woman Boone had never seen. Behind her, 2 uniformed deputies. Behind them, the red and blue pulse of lights reflecting off the wet parking lot. Wade Granger, the woman said. Badge visible. Shield number visible. The face of someone who had driven 90 minutes in a rainstorm because a phone call from the Attorney General's office had used the words imminent flight risk and potential homicide investigation. My name is Lieutenant Cortez, State Criminal Investigation Division. I have a warrant to search your residence at Ridgeview Terrace, including all secured containers and electronic devices. I also have questions about a property transfer involving Granite Peak Ventures and the death of Jolene Mackey in 2009. Wade looked at Boone. Boone looked at Wade. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The rain hammered. The recorder in Boone's pocket captured every sound. The breathing, the silence, the moment when the architecture of a predator's life began its final, irreversible collapse. Those pennies, Wade said quietly. To Boone. Just to Boone. 3 cents. That's what undid everything. No, Boone said. 3 cents is what started it. What undid everything was you. You've been undoing yourself for years. You just didn't know anyone was watching. Lieutenant Cortez stepped forward. The deputies flanked. And Wade Granger, Darren Wade Lusk, the man who had built his life on the control of others, stood in a mechanic's garage in a dying steel town and felt, for the first time in his adult life, the sensation of having absolutely no power over what happened next. Lieutenant Cortez read the warrant aloud in the garage, while the rain continued its assault on the tin roof. Wade stood motionless between the 2 deputies, not restrained, not yet, but contained in a way that was worse than handcuffs. Contained by the knowledge that every exit had been sealed, every route calculated and blocked. Every piece of architecture he'd spent 12 years constructing was being disassembled in real time by a woman with a badge and a folder full of paper that carried the weight of the state. Boone watched from the workbench. He didn't speak, didn't move. The recorder ran in his pocket, capturing the flat recitation of legal language. Premises to be searched, items to be seized, electronic devices, financial documents, contents of all locked containers, including but not limited to safes, lockboxes, and secured filing systems. The words fell into the garage like stones into deep water, each one sinking through layers of silence until they reached the bottom, where the truth had been waiting. Wade's lawyer arrived at 6:14 p.m. A man named Kendrick from a firm in Ashford. Expensive suit, expensive briefcase, the expression of someone who had been called away from dinner and hadn't yet understood why. He conferred with Wade in the corner of the garage for 4 minutes, while the deputies waited and Cortez stood with her hands clasped behind her back, and the patience of someone who had done this enough times to know that lawyers slowed the process but never stopped it. Kendrick approached Cortez. "My client will cooperate fully with the search. He maintains that the allegations are baseless and the product of a coordinated harassment campaign by..." He gestured vaguely in Boone's direction without looking at him. "Individuals with criminal histories and personal vendettas." "Noted," Cortez said. She didn't write it down. They left. The convoy, Cortez's unmarked sedan, the 2 deputy vehicles, Wade's European sedan with Kendrick at the wheel, pulled out of the gravel lot and turned south toward Ridgeview Terrace. Boone stood in the garage doorway and watched the taillights diminish in the rain until they were indistinguishable from the town's scattered streetlights, and then he was alone. He called Hatchet. "They're heading to the house. Cortez has the warrant." "I heard. Preach called. The AG's office moved faster than anyone expected. Delilah's package was strong enough to get an emergency judicial review. The warrant covers the safe." 22, 14, 31? "Yeah." Hatchet was quiet for a moment. The sound of wind in the background. He was outside, probably on the porch of Ironwood Lodge, watching the tree line. "How's he look?" "Like a building with the foundation pulled out, still standing, but leaning." "And you?" Boone looked at the photograph on the desk, at Lily's smile, at the pennies beside her. "I'm standing too." The search of the Ridgeview Terrace house took 7 hours. Boone wasn't there. He had no legal right to be there and no desire to watch. What mattered wasn't the opening of the safe, but what came after. He stayed in the garage. He rebuilt the carburetor on the Sportster for the 3rd time, not because it needed rebuilding, but because his hands needed occupation and his mind needed the mechanical rhythm of assembly and disassembly, the knowable world of parts that fit together in predictable ways. Coyote checked in at midnight. He'd stationed himself 3 blocks from Ridgeview Terrace, watching the parade of vehicles. State Crime Scene Unit, additional investigators, a van from the Digital Forensics Division that arrived at 10 p.m. and was still there. "They're pulling boxes out," Coyote said. "A lot of boxes, more than a safe's worth. They found something in the basement beyond the safe, a false wall maybe. I can see them carrying sealed evidence containers." "How many?" "I've counted 14 so far, and they're not slowing down." 14 containers. Boone sat on the stool, Ivy's stool, and absorbed the number. 14 containers of evidence from a basement that Wade had protected with a combination lock and a false wall, and 12 years of careful misdirection. 14 containers that represented, in their sealed anonymity, the documented history of a predator's career. He thought about Sandra's words in the trailer. He was shopping, a shopping list. Names and routines and vulnerabilities cataloged with the precision of a man who viewed other human beings as inventory. He thought about Jolene Mackey, about the mountain road, about the coroner who signed off in 48 hours. He thought about the names Sandra couldn't find afterward, the 3 women from the notebook, the ones who had been in contact with Darren Lusk and then hadn't. At 2:47 a.m., his phone rang. Delilah. "They opened the safe," she said. Her voice had a quality Boone hadn't heard before. Something between awe and revulsion. The sound of someone who had spent her career navigating the space between law and justice and had just encountered something that existed beyond both. Cortez called the AG's office directly from the house. I don't have details. Everything is under seal now. But she used the phrase serial pattern of predatory behavior spanning at least 15 years. Boone, she said 15 years, not 3, not 5. 15. Boone closed his eyes. The fluorescent light pressed against his lids. The number sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. 15 years of folders and photographs and carefully documented control. 15 years of women selected and isolated and consumed by a machine that operated in perfect silence behind the smile of a civic-minded businessman. Is he arrested? Taken into custody at 1:30 a.m. Cortez booked him at the state police barracks in Ashford, not the local county lockup. She's keeping it out of local jurisdiction entirely. Smart. She's very smart. And Boone, she wants to talk to Claire, not now, not tonight, but soon. Claire's testimony, combined with what they found in the safe, is going to be the centerpiece of whatever case they build. This isn't a domestic abuse prosecution anymore. This is going to be a multi-count indictment. Claire will talk. When she's ready. Make sure she's ready soon. The legal clock starts ticking the moment charges are filed. He hung up, set the phone on the workbench, picked up the 3 pennies and held them in his closed fist, not looking at them, just feeling them. The weight, the temperature, the texture of tarnished copper against skin that had been holding too tightly for too long. Then he did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He cried. Not loudly, not theatrically. The tears came the way oil seeps from an old engine, slowly, quietly, through cracks that had always been there but had never been given permission to leak. He sat on the stool with his fist closed around the pennies and his other hand flat on the workbench, and he let 4 years of frozen grief thaw in a garage that smelled like motor oil and coffee, and nobody saw it, and nobody needed to. It lasted 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Then it stopped, the way a valve closes when the pressure equalizes, and Boone wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood up and went to the coffee maker and poured a cup that was 12 hours old and tasted like it had been brewed in a radiator. He drank it, all of it, and for the first time since the night Ivy walked through the door, the fury was gone. Not suppressed, not redirected. Gone. Replaced by something quieter and harder to name. A settling, like sediment in a river that had been churning for years and was finally, slowly, beginning to clear. The days that followed moved at a different speed. Not the compressed, adrenaline-soaked velocity of the previous 2 weeks, but the long, steady rhythm of aftermath. The pace at which wreckage was cleared and foundations were inspected, and the question shifted from, what do we do to what do we do now? Claire and Ivy stayed at Ironwood Lodge for 9 days. Hatchet remained with them for the first 3, sleeping on the couch with his boots on, and the Road King parked beside the porch like a mechanical guard dog. Preach drove up on the 4th day and spent 6 hours talking to Claire. Not interrogating, not advising, just talking. The conversation happened on the lodge's back deck, where the pine trees pressed close enough to touch, and the air smelled like cold earth and resin. When Preach came back to Blackwater Ridge that evening, he sat in the garage with Boone and said nothing for 20 minutes. She's stronger than she knows, Preach finally said. Most people are. She's going to need real support, professional, long-term, whatever he was giving her, the pills. She's going through withdrawal, headaches, tremors, difficulty sleeping. Briggs found a clinic in Ashford that specializes in medication-assisted recovery. They can see her next week. Cost? Covered. I made some calls. Boone didn't ask who Preach had called. Preach's network, the web of medical professionals and crisis counselors he'd maintained since his combat medic days, was one of the few resources the Brotherhood possessed that operated entirely within the boundaries of the law. If Preach said it was covered, it was covered. On the 10th day, Claire called Boone directly. Not from a prepaid, from a phone Mercer had set up for her. New number, new account, no connection to any device Wade had ever accessed. "We want to come home," she said. Her voice was different, not stronger. That would take time. Clearer. The cotton she'd described, the fog of whatever Wade had been feeding her, was lifting. The words had edges again. Shape. Intention. "The house is a crime scene," Boone said. "They're still processing the basement. I don't mean the house. I mean home. Blackwater Ridge. Ivy needs to go back to school. I need to go back to work. I need... She paused, breathed. I need to stop hiding. I've been hiding for 3 years. I need to be somewhere that's mine. Boone looked around the garage, at the workbench, at the empty stool, at the back office with the desk and the photograph and the bourbon bottle that hadn't been opened in 11 days. I'll find you a place, he said. He found one that afternoon, a 2-bedroom apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, not elegant, not large, but clean and warm and owned by a man named Patterson, who'd been buying motorcycle parts from Boone for 8 years, and didn't ask questions when Boone said he needed the unit ready in 24 hours at a rent that a nurse's aide could afford. Hatchet and Coyote moved furniture in on Thursday. A bed for Claire. A bed for Ivy. A kitchen table from the thrift store on Route 9. A couch that Briggs contributed from his own living room without explanation. The apartment filled up the way a life fills up, piece by piece, each item carrying the fingerprints of someone who'd decided, without being asked, that this mattered. Claire and Ivy arrived on Friday afternoon. Mercer drove. Hatchet followed on the bike. The convoy was smaller this time. No urgency, no surveillance, no clock counting down to 0. Just a woman and her daughter coming home to a town that had failed them and was now slowly beginning to account for that failure. Boone was waiting at the hardware store when they pulled up. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets and his collar up against the November wind. And he watched Ivy climb out of the car and look up at the building with an expression that was equal parts wonder and suspicion. The expression of a child who had learned to distrust good things because good things had always been temporary. She saw Boone. She didn't run to him. She walked. The same deliberate, measuring walk she'd used the first night in the garage, testing the ground, calculating the distance, reading the situation for threats. But when she reached him, she did something she'd never done before. She put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his jacket and held on. Boone stood very still. He looked down at the top of her head, brown hair, ponytail still coming apart. The same kid who'd placed 3 pennies on his workbench and asked a question that had rearranged the architecture of his life. He put one hand on her shoulder. Didn't squeeze, just rested it there. The way a wall rests against a roof, holding, supporting, asking nothing in return. You smell like motor oil, Ivy said into his jacket. That's never going to change. Good. Claire was next. She stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the apartment above the hardware store with eyes that were still learning to see without the filter Wade had installed. She was thinner than she should have been, paler. The bruise below her ear had faded to a yellowish green, visible now that she'd stopped covering it with her hair. But she was upright. She was present. And when she looked at Boone, she didn't flinch. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Thank your daughter. She's the one who walked 3 miles in the rain." Claire looked at Ivy, still attached to Boone's jacket, and something happened to her face, a softening, a reconfiguration, the look of a woman seeing her child clearly for the first time in years, because the fog had lifted and the fear had receded just enough to allow the sight. "I know," Claire said. "She's been saving us both for a long time. I just couldn't see it." They went inside. Boone didn't follow. He stood on the sidewalk and watched the lights come on in the apartment windows. One, then another, then the kitchen, and he listened to the sounds that filtered through the glass. Footsteps on hardwood, a faucet running. Ivy's voice asking something about the closet. Claire's voice answering. The ordinary sounds of 2 people occupying a space that was theirs, free from monitoring, free from permission, free from the architecture of control that had defined every minute of their existence for 3 years. Boone walked back to the garage. The air had turned colder. His breath came in visible clouds. The town was quiet, the pre-Thanksgiving quiet of a place that was winding down for a holiday. Nobody had the energy to celebrate but would observe anyway, because ritual was the last thing small towns gave up. Hatchet was at the garage when he arrived, sitting on his bike in the parking lot, engine off, helmet on the tank. He didn't say anything when Boone walked up. He just tilted his head toward the side door. "Preach is inside, he's got news." They went in together. Preach stood at the workbench, hands flat on the steel. the same posture Boone used when the weight of something required a surface to distribute it across. "A G's office filed charges this morning," Preach said. 37 counts. Fraud, witness tampering, obstruction, illegal administration of controlled substances. The pills were benzodiazepines, off-label 3 times the therapeutic dose. And Boone, they've reopened the Jolene Mackey investigation. New toxicology on exhumed remains. Cortez pushed for it personally. 37 counts. Boone heard the number and felt it land somewhere deep. Not in his chest, but in the place below his chest where the things lived that didn't have names. Relief. Exhaustion. The hollow feeling that came after sustained tension, the way a house feels after the storm passes and the boards stop creaking and the only sound is dripping. "Sandra?" he asked. Cooperating. Her statement was entered into the record. The AG's office has assigned her a protective detail until the trial. Delilah's coordinating. Preach paused, adjusted his weight. Something in his expression changed. A lowering of the clinical distance, a crack in the professional veneer that revealed, briefly, the man underneath. The man who'd held dying soldiers. The man who'd told Boone the truth about substitution and then followed it with the truth about being human. "There's one more thing." "What?" "The folders in the safe, the names. There were 9 of them, 9 women. The AG's office is tracking each one. 3 have been located and contacted. 2 are cooperating. 1, he stopped, breathed. 1 is Jolene, and the investigation team believes at least 2 others may be missing persons cases that were never connected to Lusk. The garage absorbed this. The fluorescence buzzed. The oil stains on the floor reflected the light in patterns that looked, if you stared long enough, like maps of places that didn't exist. 9, Boone said. 9 that were documented. There could be more. The ones who didn't warrant a folder. The ones who got away before he filed them. Sandra got away. Sandra got lucky. Her word, not mine. Boone nodded. He walked to the desk, picked up Lily's photograph, looked at it, really looked at it, not the glance and look away of the previous 4 years, but the sustained, unblinking look of a man who was finally ready to hold his grief in the same hand as his gratitude. She'd be 12 now, he said. To no one. To everyone. To the photograph, and the garage, and the memory of a hospital room where machines beeped and stopped. 12. Middle school. She'd be taller than Ivy. She'd probably hate my music and think the garage was embarrassing. Probably, Hatchett said. And the word carried no weight and all weight, because Hatchett had known Lily, had held her on his knee at cookouts, had taught her to check tire pressure when she was 5, had stood in the back of the church at the funeral and broken 3 knuckles punching a brick wall afterward because there was nothing else to punch, and the grief had to go somewhere. She'd like Ivy, Boone said. She'd love Ivy, Hatchett said. They'd be insufferable together. Something happened to Boone's face. Not a smile. Not yet. The territory before a smile. The geological shift that precedes the surface change. The recognition that loss and love were not opposites, but companions. That they traveled the same road and arrived at the same destination, and the only difference was which one you let drive. The weeks passed. November turned to December. The first snow came early. A thin, persistent dusting that covered the gravel lot and the roof of the garage, and the sign that read Ryder Mechanical in letters that were still peeling. Boone didn't fix the sign. He liked the peeling. It was honest. Claire started seeing the therapist at the Ashford Clinic twice a week. The benzodiazepine withdrawal was brutal. Insomnia, anxiety, a tremor in her hands that made her first week back at the county clinic a study in silent endurance. But she went. She showed up. She sat across from patients and took vitals and entered data and did the work of being a person in a world that hadn't protected her when she needed it most. The tremor faded by the 3rd week. The insomnia took longer. Ivy went back to Millbrook Elementary. Her teacher, Mrs. Alderman, gold stars, never noticed the flinches, noticed them now. The school counselor, the one who'd asked about the bruise and been deflected by a computer donation, requested a meeting with Claire and spent 40 minutes apologizing. Claire listened. She didn't forgive. Forgiveness was a process, not an event, and she was too early in both to know where one ended and the other began. But she listened, and listening was enough. Boone converted the back office of the garage into something he didn't have a name for at first. He cleared out the invoices. He moved the bourbon bottle, not to the trash, but to a shelf in the parts room where it sat unopened and visible, a monument to a habit that had served its purpose and been retired. He brought in a second desk, a filing cabinet, a phone with a dedicated line. He talked to Donna Ray at the clinic. He talked to Patterson at the hardware store. He talked to the principal at Millbrook and the director of the food bank on Route 9, and the woman who ran the county's domestic violence hotline from a converted bedroom in her house because the state funding for a proper office had been cut 3 years ago and never restored. The back office became, slowly, without announcement, without a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a newspaper article, a place where people could come. Not for motorcycle repair, for the other kind of repair. The kind that didn't involve wrenches and gaskets but required the same fundamental skill. Identifying what was broken, understanding how it broke, and figuring out whether the fix was a patch or a rebuild. Hatchett handled intake. Preach handled referrals. Briggs, with his expired social work credentials and his quiet competence, handled the cases that fell between the cracks. The families that the system knew about but hadn't reached. The women whose situations were bad enough to warrant concern, but not bad enough to trigger action. The children who flinched when hands moved too fast and sat on the edges of chairs instead of the middles. They didn't advertise, they didn't name it. The people who needed it found it the way Ivy had found it. Through desperation, through word of mouth, through the last resort calculus of someone who had run out of official options and was willing to try the unofficial ones. The 3 pennies hung on the wall above Boone's desk in a small wooden frame that Mercer had built in his truck during a long-haul run to Detroit. 3 circles of tarnished copper behind glass, catching the light from the window when the afternoon sun came through at the right angle. Visitors asked about them. Boone told the story. Not all of it. Not the parts about the safe and the folders and the investigation that was still unfolding in the state attorney general's office, but the part that mattered. A girl. 3 pennies, a question. Can you protect us? On a Saturday in March, the kind of Saturday that arrived in Blackwater Ridge like an apology from winter, the air soft, the sky the color of washed denim, the first crocuses pushing through the mud along the highway. Ivy walked into the garage carrying a paper bag. She was different, not transformed. Children don't transform. They adjust, they adapt. They incorporate new information into the ongoing project of becoming a person. But the adjustment was visible. She stood taller. She didn't measure the room before entering. She walked to her stool, still hers, always hers. Nobody else sat on it anymore, and everyone knew why. And she climbed up and set the paper bag on the workbench. "What's this?" Boone asked. He was holding a socket wrench. His hands had grease on them. He smelled like motor oil. None of this had changed. None of this would change. It was who he was, and the fact that he was also something else now. Something that didn't have a name but lived in the back office, and the framed pennies and the way he answered the phone on the dedicated line at any hour. Didn't replace the first thing. It added to it. The way a second coat of paint adds to a wall. The wall is the same wall. It just holds more. "Open it," Ivy said. He wiped his hands on the rag. Opened the bag. Inside was a badge, handmade, cardboard backed with aluminum foil, covered in clear tape for durability. The letters were written in purple marker, the same purple as the notebook cover. And they were neat and careful and slightly crooked in the way that all handmade things are slightly crooked, which is what makes them more valuable than manufactured perfection. Protector for life. Boone held the badge in his hands. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at the letters and the foil and the tape and the effort that had gone into making something that would have cost 30 cents at a craft store but was, in the economy of things that actually mattered, priceless. "You're giving me a badge," he said. "You earned it." "I don't think I—" "You earned it," Ivy said again, and her voice, the voice that had been a thread, a whisper, a broken thing held together with the same tape that held her shoes, was firm, clear. The voice of a kid who had walked through the worst thing she'd ever face and come out the other side with her vocabulary intact and her assessment of the world recalibrated to include the possibility that some people, in some garages, on some rainy nights, actually showed up. Boone pinned the badge to his jacket. The cardboard bent slightly. The tape caught the fluorescent light. It was, by any objective measure, the ugliest badge ever constructed by human hands. He wore it for the rest of the day. And the next day. And the day after that. He wore it while he rebuilt a transmission on a '94 Softail. He wore it while he answered the phone in the back office and listened to a woman in Cranston describe, in halting sentences, the thing her husband did when the children were asleep. He wore it while he sat at the workbench at closing time, the garage empty, the fluorescents buzzing, Lily's photograph on the desk and the pennies on the wall and the bourbon on the shelf and the sound of a motorcycle. Hatchett's Road King, rumbling in the distance, growing fainter, heading north toward wherever Hatchett went when the day was done and the work was finished, and the silence was the good kind. He wore it until the cardboard softened and the tape peeled and the purple letters faded to something that was almost invisible, but not quite. And when it finally fell apart, months later, in the heat of summer, while Boone was teaching Ivy how to check tire pressure the way Hatchett had once taught Lily, he put the pieces in an envelope and slid the envelope into the desk drawer beside the bourbon receipts and the old invoices in the space where the photograph used to live face down. The photograph was on the desk now, permanently. Lily smiled at the garage every day, and the pennies caught the afternoon light, and the stool by the workbench was always empty until Ivy arrived and always occupied once she did. And on quiet evenings, when the last customer had gone and the bay doors were closed and the coffee was fresh and the world outside was doing what the world does, turning, indifferent, beautiful in its refusal to stop, Boone sat at his desk and looked at the framed pennies and the photograph and the space between them, and he understood something he hadn't understood before. Ivy thought she was buying protection. 3 pennies for a bodyguard, a transaction, a contract measured in copper and desperation. But what she'd actually done, what those 3 tarnished coins had purchased, in the only currency that mattered, was permission. Permission for a broken man to care again. Permission for a closed fist to open. Permission for a garage in a dying steel town to become something more than a place where engines were fixed. To become a place where people were fixed, or at least held together long enough to fix themselves. The pennies weren't a payment. They were a key. And the door they opened never closed again.